Are you ready to trust in the Lord?
Trust in the
Get
Lord.
ready to trust in the Lord.
Trust in the
Are you ready to trust in the Lord?
Trust in the
So get ready to trust in the Lord. Are you ready?
Trust in the Lord.
Praise God. Lord, we thank you so very much for the afternoon that has come upon us and for the opportunity to be in your house. We thank you, Almighty God, that the hospital is not the address for us, nor an old folks' home. When I look at the Shriners Hospital and St. Jude Hospital, and now they are smart enough to run ads showing that the children are going home for Christmas that we see so much throughout the year, born with deformities, missing of hands, legs, feet, and eyes, and then cancer at a very early age, leukemia. And the mothers and fathers who bring these children into the world at a very early age, they have to start the whole process of nurturing children that are suffering. And probably during the pregnancy, they're thinking they're going to have a child that's going to probably grow up to be a basketball star or win the Heisman Trophy or something on that order, or become some sort of a professional such as a doctor and lawyer. But yet, from the day of birth, they have to sit with them in the hospital day in and day out. But you have blessed us to have our health and strength, to be born with all our fingers, toes, and all other things necessary. And we want to pray for those that are going through that process, but we also want to pray for those who've fallen sick over the years and have lost their abilities as well. We ask that you would be with us as we launch this message today. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen. Amen. The healing, the prayer closet is an extraordinary time, and I'm glad the Lord brought it upon us some time ago for us to be able to go in the mornings and commune with the Lord and then come out and see what the reward will be. Now, I have to confess to you, I don't pray in the traditional sense of our Father. I can do that, but I sit there and I wait and see what the Lord has to say. And he gave me some things the other day about healing. And prior to that, maybe a week earlier, he had told me to attack every enemy and every entity that has brought or raised itself against our church and his word. And he gave me this word the other day that healing is on the way. And now that looks as if it says that you're not healed yet, and that the healing is coming. And if how so? Is it coming by the U.S. Post Office? I hope not. Is it coming by FedEx? Perhaps maybe better. Or is it coming by some other method? But he says that healing is on the way. Now I'm going to read some verses here in just a second, but I think that it's important for those who are sick to understand that at some point you're going to meet at the crossroads of healing. You're going to meet at the junction of healing. And your sickness does not have to be a major issue, or it can be a catastrophic issue. But I want you to know that healing is on the way. And I want to state that I spoke in the Open Rewards prayer meeting a week ago that over the past 37 years, I have, for absolute necessity, and because I understood it and believed it, that the tithe and the offering would absolutely bless my life. Having a job paying $35 a week, and at one point being homeless, having to live with a relative for some time, not being able to go to the bathroom, there was only one in the house at the time, and being careful how much you eat at the table. You don't want to sit down at someone else's table and eat and eat and eat if it's not your table and you've not put the food there. So I know what that's like. And but I believe the tithe. God said that he would open the windows of heaven and pour us out a blessing, so much so we wouldn't have room enough to receive it. And the only way that I was going to get up out of that condition I was in, to get my own place, finally to live, and to be able to fix my own table and buy my own food, there was nothing else left for me but the tithe. That was the only thing, to follow God's word. And I did. And one day I was standing on Amsterdam Avenue, and a woman came up to me and said that in front of the church that we were in at that time said to me, "Young man, I hear you in the neighborhood as a young preacher." I said, "Yes." She says, "Well, my husband and I have retired." They'd worked for the city of New York. They had a 5-room apartment with a bathtub bigger than this area here, pulpit. And she said, "We're moving and retiring and going to Georgia. And I heard about you in the neighborhood, and we want to give that apartment to you." So I went around to see it, and surely it was 5 rooms, beautiful rooms, and a 2-story walk-up. And they said, we won't take all of our furniture with us. Some of it we're going to leave here with you. I understand you don't have anything. I said, "No, I don't." And they left what Elizabeth and I, dining tables, a marble table with cast iron legs and cast iron chairs and all that, along with some other things that were left for me. And that happened because of the tithe and the offering, that I have never come to church. I've never been to a worship service in our church where I did not respond to God's word. And since that day, I have been blessed. I have my own place to stay now, praise God. When I married Elizabeth, she had her own house. She had 2 cars. She had a 1969 Buick convertible, deuce and a quarter. I said, Deacon Williams, he know about that deuce and a quarter. That deuce and a quarter used to be a bad mamma jamma. And it was convertible too, by the way. And she had her own house. She had her own job and her own money. Now, I didn't marry her for money. I don't do that. Don't you young boys get the wrong idea. I don't do that. But it's the tithe. But that's not what I come to talk to you about today. I just want to let you know that God keeps his word. And I thank y'all for letting me preach about that for all these years. We have preached about healing, and we'll continue to preach about healing. But the Lord told me to say to you the other day that that I should and will be as tenacious and committed to preaching healing that I have been, and enjoy the same success that I have enjoyed as a result of the tithe. This church is blessed. A lot of people get the wrong idea about that and think that we're boasting, but God's just blessed us. That's all there is to it, because of the tithe and the offering. But now we need healings. I'm getting reports of even some of the children being sick and needing surgery. I thank God that there's never been a surgical knife put on my body. All the years I've lived, I've never been hospitalized except for an exam once, and then I'll tell you about the other one in just a moment. So I've been enjoying health, and I give God the praise for that. And I know it's because of his word. But he has let me understand something about when a doctor give you a diagnosis and say there's nothing they can do. And they'll prescribe some medication, even if that's available, and leave you to whatever else is going to happen to you. And the Lord has sent me here to preach healing, and I'm going to preach. I'm going to preach healing. I remember one night, I don't know, it was a weekend night, I think it was, I believe it was, I don't remember now, a few years ago. I had been feeling sick earlier that day. And as the night wore on, I became increasingly sick. I got so weak that night that I couldn't get up out of the bed. I had to have Elizabeth help me get up. I've never been in a state like that before. Never. And so I said, I got to go to the hospital with the voice I had left. And she had to help me put on my shirt. That's how bad it was. I couldn't put it on myself. That's how weak I was. And we stumbled out the door, down the stairs, stopped in what is now our media area, and I threw up. As if everything I've ever eaten in years just all came running out of my mouth, smelling like you won't believe, and splattering all over the floor. And I could barely stand. And what a horrible sight. I thought to myself, who is this? Who is this happening to, and what is this? That this is happening to me. And we were able to clean that up. Elizabeth cleaned it up, and we got in the car, and she drove me to the hospital. And they took me in and began to do some things and look at me, take my blood pressure, ask me a whole lot of questions. And we were there for about 4 or 5 hours. And I had been on the toilet earlier that day, and you'll pardon this if it's offensive to anybody, but I had been on the toilet a couple of times that day, and pools of blood was coming from my rear end, and looked like other things as well. And it just got worse as it went along. So by the time I got to the hospital, they asked me if I had any more, so they could take a quick stool sample and all that kind of stuff that they do to you. And we were there, and I was just in that bed, that hospital bed, me and a whole lot of other people, for about 5 hours. We went in about 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. So about 5 o'clock that morning, they said, well, they hadn't taken me in yet. I said, I'm going home. I said, I'm going home. I said that Jesus is a healer, and that I'm his Lord, I'm his servant, and I'm going home. They said, are you sure? We don't know what's wrong with you yet. We haven't been able to run tests. We had to send some tests to the lab, with blood to the lab, send your stool to the lab, we check your pressure, and every time we're checking your heart rate, and we're checking a number of other things. We don't know what's wrong with you yet, they said to me. I said, I'm going home. I'm going home. And they said, are you sure? They said, you got to sign yourself out. We're not releasing you. I said, I'm going home. I was going home because I knew that Jesus was a healer. Now, I have to tell you, colon cancer was on my mind. That my intestines had broken up and had fallen apart, and had just come out of my rear end. That's what I thought had happened to me. And that's why I was so weak, and blood was running everywhere. I couldn't stop it. But I said, I'm going home. After I was in the hospital, I rested for a little while, and they gave me some sort of saline solution that was put in my arm. I got up, and I got back in the car, and I drove home this time. And it was the middle of the morning, and early morning, I went upstairs and I got into bed. And that's the last I heard of that sickness. I haven't heard anything from it. No more drops of blood, no more vomiting, no more weakness. So a year or so later, Elizabeth said, why don't you have a colonoscopy, an exam? I'd heard about those things. And she took one, and she said, why don't you have one? So I said, okay, reluctantly. And I went and met with the doctor, and he gave me all this crazy stuff to drink and all these things to do. I thought he was trying to kill me. And then that morning, I had to get up early that morning, the crack of day, to get to the hospital to start the procedure. They took all my clothes and put them in a basket, put a little gown on me, and rolled me into that room and put me to sleep. And an hour or so later, this is a year after that event, an hour or so later, the doctor called me and said that we've done the exam on you, and he said your colon is perfect. There are no nodules or whatever it is, that polyps. So we didn't find one polyp. He said it's as clean as anything I ever want to see. I said, well, thank you, Jesus. Because he's a healer. Yes. Now, I wanted to share those examples with you today to tell you where the Lord has brought me from. I'm a fighter, first of all. When I was sitting at my brother-in-law's table, careful about how much I ate, and sometimes people can get funny about food. And the people that serve downstairs serve the food. God bless y'all, because somebody gonna say y'all didn't put enough on the plate. Somebody gonna say you put too much on somebody else's plate. God help y'all. But when I was eating another man's food at another man's table, I was careful. And I didn't always come away from the table feeling I was filled, but I had enough sense not to complain. Kind of like the midnight special. The only thing that has brought me to the status of where I am at now, in terms of whatever Elizabeth and I possess, and we're doing well. The only thing has been the tithe and the offering. That's the only thing. It has not been a windfall. I didn't hit the number. Don't anybody know what that is? I didn't make it big in the stock market. I didn't get a job paying hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. I didn't do that. I don't get a salary from this church. When I did, it was $20 a week. And then after that, they gave me $200, and then I gave that back. But Elizabeth and I, we do okay. And it's because of the tithe and the offering. Now, I'm going to leave this in just a moment, but I want to get you ready to get healed. And so I've taken the tithe and the offering because Elizabeth and I, we okay. We're all right. And over the years, we have taken what the tithe and offering has produced in our life, and we've given it back for the children, to help as many children as we possibly can, to take them on trips around the world, to pay for their expenses, to stay in nice hotels, to travel on nice airlines, or to eat in fancy restaurants. What God has brought, the excess from the tithe and the offering that God has brought to Elizabeth and our life and to this church too, we're plowing it back into the children and to you as well, that they might be able to experience something they would never, ever, nobody, not even their own parents, could ever afford to do. And it's the tithe and the offering that just keeps getting better and better as we go along. Now, why is that important? It's important because it's the Word of God that says the tithe and the offering. And I want to talk to you today about the Word of God, about healing. I believe that the Lord is more concerned about healing than he is, while he's concerned about blessing us financially. I know that he is, and I know he's put it in my heart. I'm concerned about some of y'all. I'm concerned about your health. I don't like the fact that you don't have the kind of weight that I think you should have on your bodies. I don't like the fact that you don't move as quickly as you used to. I don't like the fact that you're on medication and your body is not as nimble as it used to be. And I don't buy this mess about the older you get, your health is supposed to break down. I don't go for that. I don't believe that. Now, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. Why? Moses' health didn't break down. You're supposed to live until you can't live no more. And I'm concerned. And my concern is not only concern, but compassion. So I want to lay my heart out before the Lord and call down healing into this house. Call down healing upon this church. And call down healing upon those that are prayerful about this church and about this ministry. And I believe, as the Lord has blessed in so many other ways in this house, that we're going to move sicknesses rather, and move healings into the place. We're going to replace sicknesses with healings. It's what we want to do. Now, I want to read some scriptures, and I want to set the scripture out that when Jesus finally decided or was called by the Spirit of God to start his ministry, of which many miracles and healings took place. He had lived, we believe, some 30 years in Galilee in the north region. And he had seen all of the sicknesses that had come upon the people. In the days of David and the days of Joshua, maybe Hezekiah, some of the others, that Israel as a nation, all the people were strong. All the cattle gave birth. All the women gave birth. All the children were healthy. All the young men married the young girls. And all the festivities and worship was just as about a higher point on planet Earth as you could ever imagine. During the days of David, during the days of Joshua, and during the days of the prophets and the kings, that they were a healthy and a blessed people. Yes. Sicknesses was not named among them. And then they fell away from God. And sickness came, as Moses told them that it would happen. So by the time Jesus gets there, not only are they sick, but they are decimated by both sickness and poverty, his people. And he sends his disciples out and tells them to heal. But in an instant, he was on his way on a journey, and someone said to him, "Come and heal my servant." Now, I'm going to read this in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 8, verse 1. When he was come down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him. Behold, there came a leper and worshiped him, saying, "Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me whole." That was an old day cancer. That's going to be my sermon next week. Let me skip over that. And that's not my sermon next week. Let me go to the next one. And when Jesus was entered into Capernaum, there came unto him a centurion. The word century means 100. A centurion is one who is a captain or an official over at least 100 soldiers. And the centurion beseeching him and saying, "Lord, my servant lieth at home sick of the palsy, grievously tormented." I look at people who have to go through chemo and other kinds of radiations and treatment, and it's torment. And that's what was happening to this man. And his servant and the centurion came out. The man wasn't a Jew, and neither was the man sick wasn't a Jew. And Jesus said unto him, being the centurion, "I will come and heal him." In other words, healing is on the way. Healing is on the way. I'll go and I'll heal him. And then the centurion answered and said, "Lord, I'm not worthy that thou shouldest come under my roof, but speak the word only, and my servant shall be healed." Now this is the faith of a non-Jew who's not sick. Yes. But because he loves his people so much, he's interceding on their behalf. This is not the palsy man, the man with the palsy, or the man with the cancer, or the man with the debilitating disease. This is not the man who's asking for healing. The one that's asking and believing the Lord for healing is the man that loves the man who's sick. You follow? Yes. Yes. And so that's what we have. And he said this. He said, "For I'm a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to this man, go, and he goeth. And to another, come, and he cometh. And my servant doeth this, and he doeth it. And this he and this, and he doeth it. Pardon me. When Jesus heard it, he marveled and said to them that follow, verily I say unto you, I have not found so great faith. Y'all know what I taught you about faith this morning. Don't forget it. Yes. You know, I taught about the entity, about the creation, the process to move the natural into the supernatural. I have not found this kind of faith, no, not in all Israel. And I say unto you that many shall come from the east and west and shall sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the children of the kingdom shall be cast into outer darkness, and there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And Jesus said unto the centurion, go thy way, and as thou hast believed, so be it done unto thee. If you believe that God's going to hear you, stand up. Stand. Jesus said, so as you believed, it shall be done unto thee. And his servant was healed the self-same hour. Now, the healing had to travel a few miles. Because the place where Jesus, you can take a seat. The place where Jesus spoke the healing was not the place where the healing finally landed out. The healing finally landed somewhere else in the man's house. So I want to tell you that I'm praying for you. I'm telling you, when I talk to Jesus, I'm talking to Jesus about you. And it may be in my closet, but you may be across town up in the Bronx, out in New Jersey somewhere. But the healing is coming. Amen. And so I wanted to say to you that I have demonstrated unequivocally the success of this church, and healing is no different. It's just I need to spend more time dealing with it. And Jesus he categorized these people as the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And so I want to, in our believe in God that we might be able to see his return, to speak healing now.
Peace be unto you. I'm Sabbath Rachel LaFleur, sitting in for the Honorable James David Manning, and you are watching the Trust in the Lord Hour live and in color. Now, we certainly don't mean to stop the very important teaching of the Honorable James David Manning, but we thought that it would be very important that we broadcast the hearing that's taking place now by the House Judiciary Committee on impeachment in regards to Tribulation Trump. So we want to broadcast that live to you, and I'll be sitting here with you making some comments as we view and listen to what is taking place.
But you know how I know that this is also a problematic experience? Just look over the past 3 weeks when the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, who by the way is absent today, I guess he can't back up his own report, but he started his own hearing by making up the factual call. When he made it up, he started the fairy tale that we're having today. If you can't even put the transcript in the right context, just read it. Chairman Schiff couldn't even read the transcript. He had to make it up, because if he didn't make it up, it didn't sound as bad. It didn't sound as bad. He said, listen, he said, let's make up some dirt. That's not what was said. The transcript, the chairman misled the American people. As an attorney, as a chairman, as a member of Congress who swore an oath to tell basically to be honest with the American people and to uphold the Constitution, that was such a massive malpractice I've never seen. Because you know why? Again, they don't care about what actually was in the transcript. They don't actually care what happened. And we heard last week from witnesses, they don't even care that the aid was released. They're simply looking at the facts to make it fit their narrative. Well, what else happened? You know, this is also the Chairman Schiff who also said that he had seen collusion in plain sight. That it was already there before the Mueller report ever came out, that all of this was going to happen. But you know, I guess maybe I might need to just not stop commenting on Chairman Schiff and his guidance, because I may end up on the next phone records subpoena as we go forward. You see, we've taken a dangerous turn in this Congress. Subpoenas are fine, properly done, and should be done properly, but they should never be at the expense of a political vendetta. Professor Turley testified last week, presumption is no substitute for proof. The current legal case for impeachment is not just woefully inadequate, but in some respects dangerous and the basis for impeachment of an American president. Today, what we were supposed to get was I love my friends on the majority of this committee said Mueller. When we got the Mueller report, it didn't go real well. So we had a lot of hearings, didn't go real well. Then we finally got Bob Mueller, and they said this is going to be the movie version. In fact, what happened, my colleagues on the majority had live readings from Capitol Hill. They made dramatic podcasts. They even wrote a comic book rendition that breathed life into the Mueller report, and it didn't work. So they brought Bob Mueller. This was the movie version. They told us Robert Mueller's testimony would be the thing that people watched and would be convinced. Guess what? They wasn't convinced. In fact, it fell flat. But you know, today, I guess, is the movie version of the Schiff report. Except one thing, the star witness failed to show up. Mr. Nunez is here. His staff is here. The leading headline is there, Schiff report. But where's Mr. Schiff? In Mueller, Robert Mueller testified. The Ken Starr report, Ken Starr testified. The author of the Schiff report is not here. Instead, he's sending his staff to do his job for him. I guess that's what you get when you're making up impeachment as you go. So as we look forward here, there's going to be plenty of time to discuss the factual case for this and the statements that are not being made. What is very detrimental to me, though, is this. This committee is not hearing from a factual witness. This committee is not doing anything past hearing from law school professors and staff. We've not been given, the chairman said something about the president not being able to come. Show me where he would actually have a proper process in this that's not talking to staff and not talking to law school professors, when we could actually have witnesses that will be called by both sides. But I want to say this in ending. I love this institution. I was here as a 19-year-old kid, as an intern, almost 32 years ago. This institution, as we see it today, is in danger. We see chairmen who are issuing subpoenas for personal vendettas. We see committees, such as the Judiciary Committee, that has held many, many substantive hearings, has been the very center point of impeachment, being used as a rubber stamp because we get not our marching orders from this committee and what it should be doing, but from the Speaker and the Intelligence Committee chairman. We're not able to do what we need to do because we're a rubber stamp. I love this institution, but in the last 3 days, over the last 3 or 4 days, I've seen stuff that just bother me to no end and should bother everyone. The Speaker of the House, after hearing 1 day of testimony in the Judiciary Committee, said go write articles. Facts be damned. Al Green, another member of the House majority, said that we can keep impeaching him over and over and over and over again. Adam Schiff, when he told us he wasn't going to come, instead hide behind his staff, he also told us that we're going to keep investigating because they know this is going nowhere in the Senate and they're desperate to have an impeachment vote on this president. The economy is good, job creation is up, military is strong, our country is safe. And the Judiciary Committee has been relegated to this. Why? Because they have the means, they have the motive, and they have the opportunity. And at the end of the day, all this is about a clock and a calendar because they can't get over the fact Donald Trump is president of the United States and they don't have a candidate that they think can beat him. It's all political. And as we have talked about before, this is a show. Unfortunately, today, the witness who is supposed to be the star witness chose to take a pass and let a staff answer for him. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Collins.
Mr. Chairman, I have a point of order.
The gentleman will state his point of order.
Mr. Chairman, Clause 2J1 of Rule 11 requires you to schedule a minority hearing day, not to consider it, not to meet to discuss it, but to schedule one, and to schedule it at a reasonable time, not after articles have been drawn, not after there's been a vote on articles of impeachment. I inquire and insist, Mr. Chairman, that you immediately schedule a minority hearing day or tell us why you are ignoring the rules.
The gentleman, we've already gone through that, but I will repeat that is not a proper point of order in today's hearing. As I've told the ranking minority member several times, I'm considering the minority's request. If you think we would be violating the rules of the House if we considered articles of impeachment before holding a minority day hearing, that point of order would be timely at a meeting where we considered such articles. It's not the purpose of today's hearing. and the point of order is not in order.
Mr. Chairman, since
Collins,
I've been implicated in this, I'd like to ask.
Without objection,
Our comments have not.
without objection,
There is
all other
objection.
opening statements will be included in the record.
Reserve my point of objection on that.
Okay, the point of
I have a
objection.
question. You've brought my name into
The
this.
gentleman,
You have brought my name into this.
the gentleman will suspend. The gentleman is recognized.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's telling me that you're considering something you have nothing to consider, and you have told me that, I'll admit on record, is nowhere close to actually following your duty as a chairman to follow the rules. And so I think the point of order is very well taken. I think the issue that we have is not, I think your timing is, show me please in the rule, have your parliamentarian show me in the rules where you come to a time of actually being able to deny this up at a certain point.
Further reserving the right to object.
As I have said.
Further reserving the right to object.
As I have said, the point of order would be in order at the meeting where we are considering articles.
Further reserving the right to object.
We will now hear presentations.
Mr. Chairman, I appeal the decision of the chair.
There's no decision to appeal. There was not a ruling and a motion. We will now hear presentations.
There's a ruling on the point of order.
You made a ruling on the point of order.
You made a ruling on the point of order, Mr. Chairman. You can't then not allow us to appeal the ruling of the chair.
We are watching the House Judiciary Committee impeachment taking place, and here you see Jerry Nadler going back and forth with Mr. Collins, and you heard the statements from Mr. Collins, who is a ranking member, against Adam Schiff that he did not show up and that he's hiding, basically stating he's being a coward. And you've heard the statements that he made for Tribulation Trump, saying that, again, this is a hoax, this is a witch hunt, in a nutshell is what he's saying. And as we continue to view this impeachment inquiry, we'll see more unfold. So let's get back, and I'll be back to share some more comments.
Evidence from counsels to the judiciary.
Is this when we just hear staff ask questions of other staff and the members get dealt out of this whole hearing? And for the next 4 hours, you're going to try to overturn the result of an election with unelected people giving testimony?
Gentlemen will suspend. This hearing will be considered in an orderly fashion. The gentleman will not yell out, and he will not attempt to disrupt the proceedings. We will now hear presentations of evidence from counsels to the Judiciary Committee for up to 60 minutes, equally divided.
I've not removed my objection yet.
Barry Burke will present for the majority, and Stephen Castor will present for the minority. Each of you will have 30 minutes to present. To help you stay within that time, there is a timing light on your table. When the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals your time has expired. Mr. Burke, you may begin.
Mr. Chairman, you do realize I've never withdrawn my
Gentlemen
objection.
will suspend.
I've not
Mr.
withdrawn my
Burke's-
objection. You've not asked my talked to my objection. I want
Gentlemen
everybody to have an opening statement.
Gentlemen will.
I'm objecting to your opening statement comment, nothing else.
Mr. Burke is recognized.
Steamroll continues.
Mr. Burke has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Collins, and all the members. Before I had the great honor of being a counsel for this committee, my young son asked me a question. He said, "Dad, does the president have to be a good person?" Like many questions by young children, it had a certain clarity, but it was hard to answer. I said, "Son, it is not a requirement that the president be a good person, but that is the hope. And it is not a requirement that the president be a good person. That is not why we are here today. That is not the issue. But the very document that created the awesome presidency and its powers that we have made clear it is a requirement that the president be a person who does not abuse his power. It is a requirement that the president be a person who does not risk national security of this nation and the integrity of our elections in order to further his own re-election prospects. It is a requirement that the president not be a person who acts as though he is above the law in putting his personal and political interests above the nation's interests. That is the lesson of the Constitution. That is the lesson of the founders. They were concerned that someone would be elected president who would use all the power of that office to serve his own personal interests at the expense of the people who elected him. They decided there needed to be a remedy because they had suffered the abuses of King George, where they had no remedy. The remedy they imposed was that if a president commits a grave offense, a high crime or misdemeanor, this body has the power to impeach that president. They wanted to ensure that a president could not serve his own interests over that of the nation. It flows from the very oath that all members of this body must take to support and defend the Constitution and bear true faith and allegiance to the same. That is why we are here today, and it is an unfortunate occasion that these proceedings are necessary. But the president's actions have left no choice. The founders were very clear in spelling out what they saw to be the greatest abuses that would raise the most concerns for our nation. They spelled them out as warning signals that if a president violated or committed one of these, that would be a reason to potentially impeach that president. They were abuse of power, betrayal of the national interest, corruption of elections. And what is so extraordinary is the conduct we're going to be talking about today of President Trump didn't violate one of these, but all three. First, the evidence is overwhelming that the president abused his power by pressuring Ukraine and its new president to investigate a political opponent. The evidence is overwhelming that the president abused his power by ramping up that pressure, by conditioning a wanted White House meeting and a needed military aid that had been approved in order to get that president to investigate a political rival. It is clear and overwhelming that in abusing that power, the president betrayed the national interest by putting his own political prospects over the national security of our country. It is clear that the president risked corrupting our elections by inviting foreign interference to knock out an adversary to help his prospects in re-election. It is why in debating the Constitution, James Madison warned that because the presidency was to be administered by a single man, his corruption might be fatal to the republic. And the scheme by President Trump was so brazen, so clear, supported by documents, actions, sworn testimony, uncontradicted, contemporaneous records, that it's hard to imagine that anybody could dispute those acts, let alone argue that that conduct does not constitute an impeachable offense or offenses. This is a big deal. President Trump did what a president of our nation is not allowed to do. It is why last week the constitutional scholar, Professor Michael Gerhardt, said, if what we're talking about is not impeachable, then nothing is impeachable. President Trump's actions are impeachable offenses. They threaten our rule of law. They threaten our institutions. And as James Madison warned us, they threaten our republic. Let me begin where we must, with the facts and evidence. First, it's important to understand why Ukraine was so important to our national security. Ukraine was under attack by its aggressive and hostile neighbor, Russia. They had already encroached on its territories. The Ukraine was at great risk that Russia would again take further territory or try. Europe had a stake in this, and so did we. I'm going to turn to an expert on this, Ambassador Taylor, who is one of the most highly decorated diplomats and recognized diplomats. For over 40 years, he served our country honorably, and he was appointed by President Trump himself to be in charge of the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine.
The Russians are violating all of the rules, treaties, understandings that they committed to that actually kept the peace in Europe for nearly 70 years. That rule of law, that order that kept the peace in Europe and allowed for prosperity as well as peace in Europe was violated by the Russians. It affects the world that we live in, that our children will grow up in, and our grandchildren. This affects the kind of world that we want to see abroad.
That is Ambassador Taylor explaining why Ukraine was so important and explaining why the president's actions so significantly risked hurting our national security, our national defense policy, and our national interest. Now, you've already heard there is significant proof that President Trump himself told the new president of Ukraine, President Zelensky, that he wanted him to investigate a political rival, former Vice President Joe Biden. And you'll hear a lot about that today. But that proof is only the tip of the iceberg. There are so many more events and meetings and contemporaneous text messages, emails, other documents that show this happened and happened exactly as it is alleged. And it is clear that in this scheme to pressure Ukraine to investigate a political rival, the person at the center of that scheme was President Donald Trump. The facts cannot be disputed. President Trump used the powers of government for a domestic political errand to put his political interests above that of the nation. I'm going to turn to another expert. I'm going to turn to Dr. Fiona Hill, the National Security Council Senior Director in the Trump administration, and she's going to explain what happened.
But it struck me yesterday when you put up on the screen Ambassador Sondland's emails and who was on these emails, and he said, these are the people who need to know, that he was absolutely right, because he was being involved in a domestic political errand. And we were being involved in national security foreign policy, and those two things had just diverged.
And that tells you what the evidence shows. The president put his own domestic political interests over the nation's national security and foreign policy. A president cannot abuse his power to secure an election. He cannot do that at the expense of the American people. That is an impeachable offense. The president has tried to make excuses for his conduct, why it's not wrongful or corrupt or an abuse of power. But the truth holds together. It makes sense. It's consistent with the evidence. When someone is offering an excuse that is not true, it is not consistent with the evidence, it does not make sense. It cannot be squared with what the facts show. And you will see these excuses do not make sense. The facts are clear that President Trump put his own political and personal interests over the nation's interest. I'd like to go through what you are going to see about the president's scheme, and you're going to hear about today from the facts that we have. First, you're going to hear that President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, pushed Ukraine to open an investigation of his political rival. Mr. Giuliani, prior to the July 25th call, he made public statements that Ukraine should investigate the former Vice President Joe Biden. He tweeted about it, putting pressure on the new president. He went to Ukraine and later went again with the assist and direction of U.S. officials who were told to aid the president's personal lawyer on the president's behalf. You'll hear that President Trump told his aides that he was relying on for Ukraine that he wanted them to, quote, talk to Rudy. What you're going to hear is that his close advisors had just gotten back on May 23rd from the inauguration of the new president, President Zelensky. They told President Trump, we were impressed. He was elected on an anti-corruption platform, a reform platform. You should schedule a White House meeting. It's very important. This is very good for the United States. And the president's response was, talk to Rudy, who had been out there claiming what the Ukrainian president had to do was investigate his political rival. You'll hear that President Trump's advisors told President Zelensky that President Trump would not schedule the wanted White House meeting unless he announced a Ukrainian investigation of former Vice President Biden. There are documents, there's sworn testimony. This happened, and there is no question from the evidence that the president did this. And President Zelensky desperately needed a White House meeting, both to show Russia that the U.S. was still supporting Ukraine and for his own credibility as a new president. You'll hear then, to ramp up the pressure, what President Trump did is he told his agencies to withhold military and security aid that had been approved and was supposed to be released to Ukraine, hundreds of millions of dollars, in order to put more pressure on Ukraine. All the agencies involved, State Department, Defense Department, National Security Council, said it should be released, that it had been approved, it was going to be released, until President Trump personally stopped it. And again, contemporaneous evidence and documents show it and prove it. People said that they were shocked. Ambassador Taylor said he was in astonishment. A witness said that it was illogical to do this, and the president never offered an explanation. But ultimately, it was discovered why he did it. Then on the July 25th call, President Trump explicitly told him he wanted him to do 2 Ukrainian investigations. One of a U.S. citizen and his political rival, and the other about the origins of the interference in the 2016 election, some conspiracy theory that Russia, who all the intelligence agencies agreed interfered with the 2016 election, that maybe it was Ukraine. Again, another investigation intended to help the president politically. That is it. And you know the president cared about the investigations that would help him politically and not Ukraine and not the national security interest. And you don't have to take my word. I'm going to play something from David Holmes, who had worked in the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine and was speaking to Ambassador Sondland, who President Trump appointed. Ambassador Sondland had just come to the Ukraine on the 26th. He met with President Zelensky. He went to a restaurant with Mr. Holmes, the U.S. political affairs counselor in Ukraine. and he called President Trump on his cell phone, and Mr. Holmes could hear that call, and then he spoke to Mr. Sondland. Let's see what happened on July 26th, the day after that call.
I heard Ambassador Sondland greet the president and explain he was calling from Kyiv. I heard President Trump then clarify that Ambassador Sondland was in Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland replied, yes, he was in Ukraine, and went on to state that President Zelensky, quote, loves your ass. I then heard President Trump ask, so he's going to do the investigation. Ambassador Sondland replied that he's going to do it, adding that President Zelensky will do anything you ask him to do.
That is sworn testimony by David Holmes, who heard it from the president himself. And it was clear to everyone, the most experienced people in government, who Donald Trump himself appointed in their positions, they knew what was going on. Let's look at a text message from Ambassador Taylor around this time on September 9th. He said, as I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign. Again, that is President Trump putting his own political and personal interests over the nation's interests to hold aid desperately needed by Ukraine in order to combat Russia and show the support. He did it to help his own campaign. Now, there have been excuses offered by the president. I'd like to briefly talk about those excuses. The first excuse offered by President Trump is that the aid was ultimately released and President Trump met with Mr. Zelensky. We heard it today. The challenge with that, though, as an excuse, is the aid was only released after President Trump got caught doing this scheme. On September 9th, the committees of this House started their investigation and announced they were investigating his conduct with regard to Ukraine. 2 days later was when he released the aid. And there also was a news article, which we'll talk about in a moment, by the Washington Post on September 5th exposing his scheme. And it was only after that that he met with President Zelensky, not in the White House, but in New York. Another excuse offered. The president was motivated by general corruption concerns. And again, the evidence shows that is not true, that that's what caused him to withhold the aid. President Zelensky, in fact, was elected on an anti-corruption platform. He was a reform candidate. His own people told him again and again, President Zelensky is a hope. He's doing it the right way. They urged him to be supportive. On his call with President Zelensky on July 25th, President Trump ignored the talking points that were prepared to talk about corruption. He only wanted to talk about 2 things, the 2 investigations that helped him politically. Every intelligence agency unanimously supported releasing the aid to Ukraine, that it was appropriate. They did a study, a corruption study. They said, release it. The White House never provided an explanation. The aid had already been approved, and it was not for any corruption issues that President Trump withheld it. The next is Ukraine was not pressured. And the argument about that is, well, today they haven't said they were pressured. Well, Ukraine was pressured then and still is pressured. They are desperately in need of the United States support as they battle the threat of Russia. So of course, they have to be careful what they said, but contemporaneous documents, emails, texts from the Ukrainian officials themselves show the pressure they felt, showed they knew what the President Trump was doing, showed what they had to do. This is one from Bill Taylor to, again, Ambassador Gordon Sondland and Ambassador Kurt Volker. Gordon, one thing Kurt and I talked about yesterday was Sasha Danilek, a senior aide of President Zelensky's, point that President Zelensky is sensitive about Ukraine being taken seriously, not merely an instrument in Washington's domestic re-election politics. They not only felt the pressure, they got the message. They were not going to get a White House meeting. They were ultimately not going to get military aid unless they furthered President Trump's re-election efforts. That is a corrupt abuse of power. Another argument that's made is that Trump never said quid pro quo. And what you're going to hear is on a call with Ambassador Sondland after a Washington Post article came out on September 5th, which we will look at. After that, there was a Washington Post article that came out that, again, exposed the Ukrainian scheme. Days after that, President Trump was on a phone call with Ambassador Sondland and without prompting said there was no quid pro quo because he got caught. So he's offering his defense. But even Ambassador Sondland in his sworn testimony didn't buy it because ultimately then President Trump not only was not dissuaded, he again described what he wanted. He didn't want Ukraine to actually conduct these investigations. He wanted them to announce the investigations of his political rival, to help him politically. He continued, and you'll hear more about that. Again, none of these excuses hold any water, and they are refuted by testimony, contemporaneous records, and more. Now, some have suggested that we should wait to proceed with these impeachment proceedings because we've not heard from all of the witnesses or obtained all the documents. But the reason we have not heard from all the witnesses or documents is because President Trump himself has obstructed the investigation. He's directed his most senior aides who are involved in some of these events not to come testify, to defy subpoenas. He has told every one of his agencies with records that could be relevant not to produce those records to us, to try to obstruct our investigation. Now, this is evidence that President Trump is replaying the playbook used in the prior Department of Justice investigation. In that investigation, he directed his White House counsel to create a false, phony record and document and lie, denying that President Trump had told him to fire the special counsel. He did many other things to try to interfere with that investigation. He attacked the investigators and witnesses and called them horrible names, just as he has done here. And President Trump thought he got away with it. On July 24th was the day that the special counsel testified before this committee and the House Intelligence Committee. The 24th. It was exactly the following day, the 25th, that President Trump spoke to President Zelensky in furtherance of his Ukrainian scheme. He thought he got away with it. Not only that, he thought he could use his powers to interfere with that investigation. So he could do what he wanted. He could act like he was above the law. And if he got caught, he would again use his powers to try to obstruct the investigation and prevent the facts from coming out. And that's exactly what he did. But fortunately, because of the true American patriots who came forward to testify despite the threats by President against the people who worked in his own administration, they told the story. They on their own produced documents that provide uncontroverted, clear, and overwhelming evidence that President Trump did this scheme. He put his political re-election interests over the nation's national security and the integrity of its elections. He did it intentionally. He did it corruptly. He abused his powers in ways that the founders feared the most. No person in this country has the ability to prevent investigations, and neither does the president. Our Constitution does not allow it. No one is above the law, not even the president. And one of the concerns and requirements of finding an impeachable offense, is there an urgency? Is there a sense that you have to move because it could be repeated? Well, again, first, All the constitutional experts who testified recognized that obstructing an investigation is an impeachable offense. But here, the offense we're talking about that's being interfered or obstructed with is interfering with this very election that's coming up. And I submit to you, given what happened with the Department of Justice investigation, given what's happening here, if in fact President Trump can get away with what he did again, our imagination is the only limit to what President Trump may do next, or what a future president may do next, to try to abuse his or her power to serve his own personal interest over the nation's interest.
I am Sabbath Rachel Lafleur, and we are watching the House Judiciary Committee impeachment hearing that is taking place right now, live and in color. You are listening to Barry Burke lay out the evidence against Tribulation Trump, and I believe that he has done so far what I think to be strong evidence, as he has showed us text messages. We have seen some testimonies thus far, and he is continuing to lay out the rest as he shows that Tribulation Trump indeed abused his power and was doing all of this for his own personal interest. We're going to continue to watch the live broadcast, and I'll be back to share more with you.
This Congress considered the impeachment of President Nixon. And after action was taken, President Nixon famously said, if the president does it, it is not illegal. And this body rejected that, because that's not so. That goes directly contrary to what the founder said. But President Trump has said the same thing in responding to the prior investigation by Department of Justice and defending his conduct. Here's what he said.
Then I have an Article 2 where I have the right to do whatever I want as president.
That he has the right to do whatever he wants as president. That is as wrong as when President Nixon said a similar thing. That is not what the Constitution provides. That is not what the country demands. He does not have the right to do whatever he wants. Turning to the second abuse of power I'm most concerned, betrayal of the nation involving foreign powers. The American people have suffered that foreign influence when President Trump treated military aid that had been approved, taxpayers' dollars, and decided to treat it as his own checkbook to try to further his own re-election chances. That reflects what the founders were concerned about. And finally, corruption of our elections. The framers knew that corrupt leaders, or leaders acting corruptly, concentrate their powers to manipulate elections and undercut adversaries. They talked about it frequently. That is why the framers thought electoral treachery, particularly involving foreign powers, was a critical abuse and that could support and lead to impeachment. Now, the American people learned last election how dangerous foreign intervention in our elections can be. Let me show another clip from candidate Trump on the campaign trail.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press.
And Russia was listening. Within approximately 5 hours of President Trump's invitation to Russia to interfere in our election by trying to hack and obtain the emails of his political opponent. Russia, in fact, tried to do that for the first time. The very officers who were then indicted by the Department of Justice for that conduct, they took candidate Trump's invitation. Now, the American people learned a lesson. President Trump, unfortunately, apparently learned a different lesson. Let's look.
Well, I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd start a major investigation into the Bidens. It's a very simple answer. They should investigate the Bidens.
So this was President Trump answering a question about what did he want President Zelensky to do. So even after he got caught, he is saying, again, this vulnerable nation, dependent on U.S. support militarily and otherwise, again, he's telling them what to do. And unlike in 2016, when he only had a campaign platform, which to extend the invitation to a foreign power. Now he has the levers of government in his control to not only request it and invite it, but to pressure that country to do it. And that's exactly what he did, and you'll hear more about that in the presentation from the House Intelligence Committee. And what's most striking as we come back to this issue that the framers were concerned about, is there a continuing risk of wrongdoing? The fact that President Trump did this after he was caught shows the risk of what will happen if this body doesn't act. He really does believe he can act as though he were above the law. He really does believe, as evidenced by this conduct, that he can put his personal and political interests over the nation's interest, over the nation's national security interest, over the nation's integrity of its elections. So, of course, we do have an election coming up. That's not a reason to postpone this discussion. That's a reason we must have this discussion, to make sure it is not interfered with, to make sure this president doesn't do it, to make sure future presidents do not do it. It is the hope that in these discussions...
Again, you're listening to Barry Burke as he lays out strong evidence against Tribulation Trump. I find it quite interesting that he played the tape of Tribulation Trump making a statement to Russia in regards to investigating Hillary Clinton, and then he makes another statement to President Zelensky in regards to investigating Biden. And so we see with these two clips, and this is from the mouth of Tribulation Trump, him making statements to foreign countries in regards to investigations with his opponents. And so again, I think that Barry Burke is doing a great job in laying out a strong evidence against Tribulation Trump. I'm interested to see how the other side is going to come against this, as he is laying out facts and he is playing videos and he's showing text messages and he is showing testimonies from others. I'm very interested to see how they try to combat this, and not just by saying that this is a witch hunt, that this is fake news, that these are made up stories, as Mr. Collins did in the beginning, but facts to state that these things are not true. Obviously, we know that they are true because we've seen them. So again, this is all quite interesting. Let's get back to the live broadcast.
Presentations we're going to hear will not distort the record, focus on process points, raise extraneous matters that really are intended to distract rather than focus on what the conduct was at issue here. It is a reason to focus on the facts and what is in the country's best interest. History, future generations will be the judge.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Thank you, Mr. Burke. Mr. Castor, you
Mr.
are
Chairman,
you are recognized for 30 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Mr. Castor is recognized for 30 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Mr. Castor is recognized for 30 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, the witness has violated Rule 17, and my point of order should be heard.
Point of order.
The witness has used language which impugns the motives of the president and suggests he's disloyal to his country, and those words should be stricken from the record and taken down.
The point of order is not sustained. Witnesses are not subject to the rules of decorum.
Appeal the ruling of the chair.
In the same way members are. The topic of the hearing is the president's misconduct, so none of us should find it surprising that we are hearing testimony that is critical of the president. I do not find that the witness's comments are disorderly. I find they are pertinent to the subject matter of this hearing. The witness would be able to continue, except that his time has expired. Mr. Castor is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, it's not... Mr. Chairman, my point of order is not that his words are disorderly. They are unparliamentary. They violate the rules of the House. They should be taken down. This is not about his conduct. He's talking about the motives and the character of the President of the United States.
The gentleman will suspend. The rules of decorum apply to members of the House, not to witnesses. The gentleman may proceed.
So I appeal the ruling of the chair.
That is not a ruling. There was no.
It is a ruling on a point of order. It's appealable.
That is a rule. Subject to a vote. And that's a rule.
The point of order is not sustained.
Appeals the ruling of the chair.
Appeals the ruling of the
I
chair.
move to table
The motion is made to table the appeal of the ruling of the chair. The motion
Move the
is not
motion to
debatable.
table is made in writing.
Motion to table.
Move the motion is made
Motion
in
table is
writing.
not in debate, is not, all in favor of the motion to all in favor of the motion to table will say aye. Aye.
We got,
Point, opposed, no. No. The motion to table,
She has to put it in writing first, then you can call the vote.
the motion
Thank
to table
At least
is,
you're following the rules.
the motion to table is sustained.
Roll call.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren?
Aye.
Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson Lee?
Aye.
Ms. Jackson Lee votes aye. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Cohen votes aye. Mr. Johnson of Georgia? Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes aye. Mr. Deutsch? Mr. Deutsch votes aye. Ms. Bass? Ms. Bass votes aye. Mr. Richmond? Mr. Richmond votes aye. Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Jeffries votes aye. Mr. Cicilline?
Aye.
Mr. Cicilline votes aye. Mr. Swalwell?
Aye.
Mr. Swalwell votes aye. Mr. Liu?
Aye.
Mr. Liu votes aye. Mr. Raskin?
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Ms. Jayapal?
Aye.
Ms. Jayapal votes aye. Ms. Demings?
Aye.
Ms. Demings votes aye. Mr. Correa?
Aye.
Mr. Correa votes aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Ms. Garcia?
Aye.
Ms. Garcia votes aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse votes aye. Ms. McBath?
Aye.
Ms. McBath votes aye. Mr. Stanton?
Aye.
Mr. Stanton votes aye. Ms. Dean?
Aye.
Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. McCarcel-Powell?
Aye.
Ms. McCarcel-Powell votes aye. Ms. Escobar?
Aye.
Ms. Escobar votes aye. Mr. Collins?
Nope.
Mr. Collins votes no. Mr. Sensenbrenner? Mr. Sensenbrenner votes no. Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Shabbat votes no. Mr. Gomert? Mr. Gomert votes no. Mr. Jordan? Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Buck? Mr. Ratcliffe? Mr. Ratcliffe votes no. Ms. Roby? Ms. Roby votes no. Mr. Gates?
No.
Mr. Gates votes no. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes no. Mr. Biggs? Mr. McClintock? No. Mr. McClintock votes no. Ms. Lesko?
No.
Ms. Lesko votes no. Mr. Rechtenthaler? Mr. Klein?
No.
Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong?
No.
Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Stubbe?
No.
Mr. Stubbe votes no.
Mr. Chairman, how am I recorded?
Mr. Biggs, you are not recorded.
You said no.
Mr. Biggs votes no.
Has every member voted who wishes to vote? The clerk will report.
Got it. 15 noes. Mr. Chairman, there are 24 ayes and 15 noes.
Motion to table is carried.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary inquiry. May I make a parliamentary
Mr.
inquiry?
Castor is recognized. I will not recognize a parliamentary inquiry at this time. Mr. Castor is recognized for 30 minutes.
Morning, Chairman Nadler, Ranking Member Collins, members of the committee, and members of the staff. My name's Steve Castor. I'm a congressional staff member. I serve with the Oversight Committee on the Republican staff with Mr. Jordan. I'm also, for purposes of this investigation, I'm a shared staffer with the Judiciary Committee and Mr. Collins and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and Mr. Nunes. It sure is atypical for a staffer to be presenting, but again, thanks for having me. The purpose of this hearing, as we understand it, is to discuss whether President Donald J. Trump's conduct fits the definition of a high crime and misdemeanor. It does not. Such that the committee should consider articles of impeachment to remove the president from office, and it should not. This case, in many respects, comes down to 8 lines in a call transcript. Let me say clearly and unequivocally that the answer to that question is no. The record in the Democrats' impeachment inquiry does not show that President Trump abused the power of his office or obstructed Congress. To impeach a president who 63 million people voted for over 8 lines in a call transcript is baloney. Democrats seek to impeach President Trump not because they have evidence of high crimes or misdemeanors, but because they disagree with his policies. This impeachment inquiry is not the organic outgrowth of serious misconduct. Democrats have been searching for a set of facts on which to impeach President Trump since his inauguration on January 20th, 2017. Just 27 minutes after the president's inauguration that day, the Washington Post ran a story that the campaign to impeach the president has already begun. The article reported Democrats and liberal activists are mounting broad opposition to stymieing Trump's agenda, and noted that impeachment strategists believed the Constitution's emoluments clause would be the vehicle. In the first 2 years of the administration, Democrats in the House introduced articles of impeachment to remove President Trump from office on several very different factual bases. On January 3rd, the very first day of the new Congress, Congressman Sherman introduced articles of impeachment against the president. The same day, Representative Tlaib said, we're going to go in there, we're going to impeach the president. In May 2019, Representative Green said on MSNBC, if we don't impeach this president, he will be reelected. Even Speaker Pelosi, who has said that impeachment is a somber and prayerful exercise, has called President Trump an imposter and said it is dangerous to allow voters to judge his performance in 2020. The obsession with impeaching the president is reflected in House Democrats have used the power of their majority in the past 11 months. In the Oversight Committee, the Democrats' first announced witness was Michael Cohen, a disgraced felon who pleaded guilty to lying to Congress. When he came before us at the Oversight Committee, he then lied again as many as 8 times. Oversight Committee Democrats demanded information about the president's personal finances and even subpoenaed the president's accounting firm Mazars for large swaths of sensitive and personal financial information about the entire Trump family. The subpoena was issued over the objection of committee Republicans and without a vote. In the Ways and Means Committee, Democrats demanded the president's personal tax return information. The reason they cited for wanting the president's tax returns, they said, was to oversee the IRS's audit process for presidential tax returns. You can judge that for yourself. In the Financial Services Committee, Democrats demanded and subpoenaed the president's bank records going back 10 years. The Financial Services Committee staff, the Republicans tell me, the information demanded would cover every withdrawal, credit card swipe, or debit card purchase of every member of the Trump family, including his minor child. The reason that the Democrats gave for why they needed such voluminous and intrusive personal information about the Trump family was, get this, financial industry compliance with banking statutes and regulations. Here in the Judiciary Committee, Democrats sent out letters demanding information from over 80 recipients, including the president's children, business partners, employees, his campaign, businesses, and foundation. Of course, the main event for the Judiciary Committee was the report of Special Counsel Mueller, which Democrats would believe would serve as the evidentiary basis for impeaching the president. Despite interviewing 500 witnesses, issuing 2,800 subpoenas, executing almost 500 search warrants, and spending $25 million, the special counsel's 19 attorneys and 40 FBI agents, analysts, and staff found no conspiracy or coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. After the Trump-Russia collusion allegations did not pan out, Democrats focused their efforts on obstruction of justice. They criticized Attorney General Barr for concluding that no crime of obstruction had occurred in the special counsel investigation. But in fact, it was entirely appropriate for the Attorney General to make that call because the special counsel declined to do so. Not surprisingly, the Democrats' Mueller hearing was underwhelming, to say the least. And the sequel, with Corey Lewandowski, definitely did not move the impeachment needle either. The Intelligence Committee, too, was heavily invested in the Russia collusion investigation. Committee Democrats hired former federal prosecutors to prepare for their anticipated efforts to impeach the president. Now that the Russian collusion allegations did not work out, Democrats have settled on the Ukraine phone call, 8 lines the president uttered on July 25th with Ukrainian President Zelensky. But the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Committee of Jurisdiction, wasn't the committee leading the impeachment inquiry or holding the hearings. Neither was the Oversight Committee, the House's chief investigative entity. The Judiciary Committee was only recently brought back into the mix after fact-finding concluded. Instead, the impeachment inquiry was run by the House Intelligence Committee and these former federal prosecutors. Democrats on the Intelligence Committee ran the impeachment inquiry in a manifestly unfair way. All the fact-finding was unclassified, and that was made clear at the top of every single deposition, but the Democrats took advantage of the closed-door process in the Capitol basement bunker, the SCIF, to control access to information. The secrecy effectively weaponized the investigation, allowing misleading public narratives to form and catch hold with careful leaks of witness testimony. Democrats refused to invite Republican witnesses and directed witnesses called by the Democrats not to answer our questions. In the public hearings, many of these unfair processes continued. Democrats refused to invite numerous witnesses requested by Republicans, interrupted Republican questioning, and prevented witnesses from answering Republican questions. Democrats voted down, by virtue of a motion to table, with no notice, subpoenas for documents and testimony requested by Republicans. I'll note that Democrats never once brought any of their subpoenas to a vote before the Intelligence Committee. This unfair process reflects the degree to which Democrats are obsessed with impeaching the president. The Democrats went searching for a set of facts on which to impeach the president: the emoluments clause, the president's business and financial records, the Mueller report, allegations of obstruction, before landing on the Ukraine phone call. The impeachment inquiry is clearly an orchestrated effort to upend our political system. According to Politico, the Speaker has tightly scripted every step of the impeachment inquiry. Democrats have reportedly convened focus groups to test which allegations, whether it be quid pro quo or bribery or extortion, were most compelling to the American public. Speaker Pelosi said Democrats must strike while the iron is hot on impeaching the president. The entire duration of the impeachment inquiry, from the time Speaker Pelosi announced it on September 24th until today, has been 76 days. As Professor Turley testified last Wednesday, this impeachment would stand out among modern impeachments as the shortest proceeding with the thinnest evidentiary record and the narrowest grounds ever used to impeach a president. The artificial and arbitrary political deadline by which Democrats are determined to finish impeachment by Christmas leads to a rushed process and missed opportunities to obtain relevant information. Democrats avoided the accommodations process required by federal courts in disputes between Congress and the executive. Democrats declined to attempt to negotiate with the administration for the production of documents and witnesses. Democrats did not exhaust all their options to entice witnesses or agencies to cooperate, such as allowing witnesses to appear with agency lawyers or initiating contempt proceedings. Sometimes the threat of a contempt proceeding gets you a different result. Sometimes the witnesses choose to appear when contempt is on the table. Democrats even withdrew a subpoena to one witness who asked a federal court to resolve conflicting orders from Congress and the executive, either because the Democrats did not want to wait for the court to rule or they didn't like the presiding judge, Judge Leon. Instead, Democrats made their demands and refused to budge. Democrats told witnesses at the outset that their refusal to cooperate in full would be used against them and the president. Democrats threatened federal employees that their salaries could be withheld for not meeting committee demands. These tactics are fundamentally unfair and counterproductive for gathering information in any serious inquiry. This rushed and take-it-or-leave-it approach to investigating is contrary to how successful congressional investigations typically work. Congressional investigations take time. There is no easy button. In this job, you must take the information that's offered, even if you don't like the terms. You should not say no to taking a witness's testimony because you would prefer the agency counsels not present. If that's the only means of obtaining the testimony, you should take it. Your priority must not be on blocking information out, it must be on seeking information. In all recent major congressional investigations, for example, Chairman Goodlatte and Gowdy's investigation into the Justice Department's decision during 2016, the IRS targeting investigation, the Benghazi investigation, and Fast and Furious, there have been give and take between Congress and the executive. In the Goodlatte Gowdy investigation, for example, it took 2 months. 2 months of negotiations before the committees conducted the first witness interview with Deputy Director McCabe. The Justice Department only began producing documents to the committee after many more months of discussions. In none of these investigations did Congress get everything it wanted right at the beginning, certainly not within 76 days, but with persistence and patience, we eventually did receive enough information to do our work. And contrary to talking points, the Trump administration has in fact cooperated with and facilitated congressional oversight and investigations. For example, earlier this year, the Oversight Committee conducted an investigation into security clearances at the White House. The central allegation put forward was that the White House deviated from established procedures to grant clearances to certain White House staff. The Democrats sought to interview career staff who performed these security clearance reviews, but declined the witness initially to appear with agency counsel. The House and the White House were at an impasse. However, after a little bit of time, we, the Republican staff, with the help of Mr. Jordan, convinced the witness to appear with agency counsel for our own transcribed interview, and the Democrats came along. The subsequent interviews in the security clearance investigation were conducted with agency counsel. The testimony allowed the committee to obtain the evidence, to get to the bottom of what was going on, and it wasn't what was alleged. Nobody outside the security clearance office was handing out clearances. Certainly not to senior White House staffers. In this impeachment inquiry, however, Democrats have turned away information that could be valuable to the inquiry by disallowing agency counsel to accompany witnesses. Democrats have turned away information by declining to negotiate in good faith with the administration about the scope of document requests. As a result of these failures, the evidentiary record in the impeachment inquiry is incomplete and in many places incoherent. The failure to exhaust all avenues to obtain information severely risks undermining the legitimacy of any articles of impeachment. As Professor Turley said to the committee last week, I'm concerned about lowering impeachment standards to fit a paucity of evidence and an abundance of anger. I believe this impeachment not only fails the standard of past impeachments, but would create a dangerous precedent for future impeachments. Professor Turley elaborated that the current lack of proof is another reason why the abbreviated investigation into this matter is so damaging for the case of impeachment. The substantive case for impeaching President Trump as a result of an artificial, arbitrary, and political schedule relies heavily on ambiguous facts, presumptions, and speculation. President Turley warned here, too, that impeachments have been based on proof, not presumptions. The Democrats do not have the proof. Now, my Democrat counterparts on the Intelligence Committee are talented attorneys. I'm sure they will tell you a riveting story about a shadow or irregular foreign policy apparatus and a smear campaign designed to extort Ukraine for the president's political benefit. They'll tell you about President Trump and how he put his own political interests ahead of national security by mentioning former Vice President Joe Biden by name and raising the allegations of Ukrainian influence in the 2016 election on the July 25th call. They'll try to convince you that the Trump administration, the same administration Democrats regularly accuse of being incompetent, orchestrated an international conspiracy at the highest levels. None of this adds up. It may be a great screenplay, but it's not what the evidence shows. The Democrats' impeachment inquiry ignores all of the evidence that does not advance their story. The Democrats' impeachment narrative resolves all ambiguous facts and conflicting evidence in a way that is most unflattering to the president. The Democrats' impeachment narrative ignores public statements from senior Ukrainian officials that contradict the narrative. As you listen to the Democrat presentation later today, I urge you to keep these points in mind. What evidence that has been gathered in the impeachment inquiry paints a different picture. I won't provide a detailed presentation now, but allow me to highlight a few points. First, the summary of the July 25th phone call reflects no conditionality or pressure. President Zelensky never vocalized any discomfort or pressure on the call. Contrary to Democrat allegations, President Trump was not asking for a favor that would help his reelection. He was asking for assistance in helping our country move forward from the divisiveness of the Russia collusion investigation. Second, since President Trump has declassified and publicly released the call summary 75 days ago, President Zelensky has said publicly and repeatedly that he felt no pressure. He said it on September 25th at the United Nations General Assembly. He said it in an interview published on October 6th. He said it again on October 10th. And most recently, he said it just last week in Time magazine. Other senior Ukrainian officials have also said there was no linkage between a meeting, security assistance, and an investigation. If President Trump was truly orchestrating a pressure campaign to force Ukraine to investigate former Vice President Biden, one would think that Ukraine would have felt some pressure. Third, at the time of the July 25th call, senior officials in Kyiv did not know that the security assistance was paused. They did not learn it was paused until the pause was reported publicly in the U.S. media on August 28th. As Ambassador Volker testified, because the highest levels of the Ukrainian government did not know about the pause, there was no leverage implied. Finally, President Zelensky met with President Trump in New York on September 25th at the United Nations. Shortly thereafter, or shortly before that, the security assistance flowed to Ukraine. Both happened without Ukraine ever taking actions or investigations. The impeachment record also has substantial evidence going to the president's state of mind, undercutting the Democrats' assertion of some malicious intent. Witnesses testified that President Trump has a deeply rooted, genuine, and reasonable skepticism of Ukraine stemming from its history of corruption. President Trump is skeptical of U.S. taxpayer-funded foreign assistance and believes that our allies should share more of the burden of Ukraine's defense. Ukrainian politicians openly spoke out against President Trump during the 2016 election. These events bear directly on the president's state of mind. President Zelensky had run on an anti-corruption platform, but he was an untried politician with a relationship to a controversial Ukrainian oligarch. When former Vice President Pence met with President Zelensky in Warsaw, when Vice President Pence met with President Zelensky in Warsaw on September 1, he stressed to him the need for reform and reiterated the president's concern about burden sharing, especially among European allies. In late August and early September, after his party took control of the Ukrainian parliament, Ukraine passed historic reforms to fight corruption. These reforms including removing parliamentary immunity, which witnesses said had been a historic source of corruption. Imagine if members of our Congress had immunity. President Trump later lifted the pause on security assistance and met with President Zelensky 2 weeks later. The aid was paused for 55 days.
You are watching the Manning Report. I'm Sabbath Rachel LaFleur, sitting in for the Honorable James David Manning, and we are watching the live broadcast of the House Judiciary Committee impeachment hearing. You're listening to Mr. Stephen Castor, who is laying out the grounds for Tribulation Trumps, for the GOP side, in stating that no impeachment should be done against Tribulation Trump because he has not done anything. And as he has laid down what they consider to be facts and evidence, we've heard some of the statements that he has made, and I have a lot of questions about many things that he has stated, starting off with Michael Cohen first and foremost. But we're going to continue to listen, and I'll be back to share more with you.
But those disagreements are not enough to justify the irrevocable action of removing him from office. The Democrats' hyperbole and histrionics are no good reason, 11 months out from an election, to prevent the American people from deciding on their own who is going to be their next president. This record also does not support a conclusion that President Trump obstructed Congress during the impeachment inquiry for many of the procedural defects I touched on earlier. Additionally, as a factual matter, the only direct testimony the investigation has obtained about the president's reaction to the inquiry is from Ambassador Sondland, who testified President Trump told him to cooperate and tell the truth. President Trump has also declassified and released the summaries of his 2 phone calls with President Zelensky. President Trump has said that he would like witnesses to testify, but he's been forced to resist the unfair and abusive process. I believe strongly in the prerogatives of the Congress. It's awful to hear President Turley's testimony from last week when he critiqued the House for proceeding on impeachment so rapidly and on such a thin record. Professor Turley said to set this abbreviated schedule, demand documents, and then impeach because they haven't been turned over when they go to court, I think is an abuse of power. The impeachment of a duly elected president, as Chairman Nadler said in 1998, is the undoing of a national election. Now, I understand Democrats issued a report over the weekend arguing that contrary to the chairman's statement in 1998, impeachment is not undoing an election. I would just respond by saying that I don't think many of the 63 million Americans from all around the country who voted for President Trump in 2016 would agree. By impeaching President Trump, the House would essentially be nullifying the decision of those Americans. And the House would be doing it in less than 11 months before the next election. There still is no compelling argument for why Democrats in the House must take this decision out of the hands of the voters and do it before Christmas. During the Clinton impeachment in 1998, the chairman said that at bare minimum, the president's accusers must go beyond hearsay and innuendo and beyond the demands that the president prove his innocence of vague and changing charges. I would submit that those words ring as true today as the chairman believed them to be in 1998. The impeachment record is heavily reliant on hearsay, innuendo, and presumptions. Democrats have lobbed vague and ever-changing charges for impeachment going as far back as the president's inauguration. For all these reasons, the extraordinary exercise of the House's impeachment authority is not warranted on the evidentiary record presented. Thank you for allowing me to present this information this morning, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you both for your presentations. Mr. Burke, you are now excused, and we will invite Mr. Goldman to take his place at the witness table.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Who seeks what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
I have a parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pursuant to Rule 7B of the House Rules, the chairman is allowed to administer an oath, not mandated to, but it has been the practice of this committee.
Now, we've just heard Stephen Castor make his grounds in defense of Tribulation Trump. And I would say that that was a weak defense for Tribulation Trump. You know, many of the statements that he made, starting with Michael Cohen and the fact that the Democrats, his whole point was saying that the Democrats are against Tribulation Trump. They've been trying to impeach him since he got the seat of the presidency from 63 million people, as he stated. And there is no doubt that the Democrats do not like Tribulation Trump. No surprise about that. We all know that. And with good reason that they don't like him. But the so-called evidence or facts that he laid out, starting with Michael Cohen and stating that the Democrats called Michael Cohen forth and he lied before them 8 times. And then he went on to quote a story from the Washington Post stating that they were trying to impeach Tribulation Trump since January. Then he went on to state that the Democrats have stopped witnesses from coming forth or did not want to hear from certain witnesses and so forth. And as I'm listening to him make all of these statements, starting with Michael Cohen, who lied 8 times. We know that Michael Cohen did lie, but he lied on behalf of Tribulation Trump. What I find interesting about their defense from Stephen Castor is every statement that he made against the Democrats is the same truth about Tribulation Trump. So when he talks about Michael Cohen lying 8 times before the witness, how many times have we heard Tribulation Trump lies? And he talks about Washington Post making this story about the Democrats are against Tribulation Trump and they've been trying to impeach him since he became president. How many stories have the Washington Post written about Tribulation Trump? And so what my point is, if you're going to say one thing as truth and fact, you can't ignore the other. So if Michael Cohen lied and he's a liar and you're condemning him as a liar, what about Tribulation Trump, who has lied repeatedly? And they all know this. If the Washington Post is a media that you would use as defense for the president, what about all the stories that they told against the president? Is that not true? Is only the truth what they state against the Democrats? But when they post about Tribulation Trump and how many lies he's told, that's not true. And if you talk about the Democrats not wanting to hear from witnesses and trying to impede truth and information coming forth, what about Tribulation Trump, who has definitely impeded many witnesses to come forth in his own administration? And so I consider this to be a very weak defense on behalf of Tribulation Trump. So as we have watched what we've heard so far from Barry Burke and from Stephen Castor, you know, one thing that I am sure about, and Pastor Manning has stated this many times, is that the base of Tribulation Trump will stay with him no matter what. It doesn't matter what evidence is brought forth. It doesn't matter what is said. It doesn't matter what is shown on camera or what is heard on tape. It doesn't matter what kind of text messages we have seen. They will go against and deny and make excuses no matter what. His base will always stay in support of Tribulation Trump. And that is what we are witnessing here. Because whether you like it or not, truth is truth. Fact is fact. It's not opinion. And so that is what we are witnessing as we have heard from these 2 men. As Pastor Manning is also watching, Pastor Manning has made a statement, and I want to read that. And he states, Attorney Castro has not offered one defense statement against the actual charges. And I say amen to that. Not even a denial. The Tribulation Trump pressured President Zelensky. Incredible. And Pastor Manning, you are absolutely right. As Barry Burke laid out all of this evidence, I didn't hear Stephen Castor mention anything against the text messages that he showed. I didn't hear him mention anything against the testimony that they played. I didn't hear him mention anything about the 2 statements that came out of the mouth of Tribulation Trump himself when he stood before the camera and told them, oh, you know what, Ukraine, yeah, they should investigate Biden. He didn't make any mention of that. And the reason why is because they can't. You cannot fight against truth. Whether you like it or not, truth will always be truth. Now, you can make excuses. You can try to deny it, but you cannot fight against truth. And that is what we just saw between Barry Burke and Stephen Castor. Quite incredible. Indeed, it's incredible, Pastor Manning, as you just stated. And so as we again listen to the rest of the live broadcast of this hearing, and we continue to hear more evidence against Tribulation Trump and the defense for Tribulation Trump, you know, as you sit there, and again, I understand his base is always going to be his base. They don't care. I understand that clearly. I know that nothing is going to move them or change them. But for the rest of the people in the United States of America, for the rest of the people who are at least open to hear and remain neutral, whether you're for or against Tribulation Trump, just listen to what is fact, not opinion, because opinion doesn't mean anything. Listen to the facts that they are laying out and make a judgment based on facts, not whether or not you think the economy is booming and he's done some great things with jobs and he's done all of these other things that you think is so great. Make your judgment based on what this man has done. You know, the interesting thing about some of the things that I've heard thus far is the fact that Tribulation Trump has stated out himself, I can do whatever I want as president. And I've stated to you before that I cannot forget when he did the first dance with Melania after he won the seat of the presidency, illegally, of course. He played the song by Frank Sinatra, I Did It My Way. This has always been the mindset of Tribulation Trump, that he was going to do everything his way. And as he stated, again out of his mouth, caught on camera, I can do whatever I want as president. And that's what we have seen, his abuse of power, his obstruction of justice, because he believes that he can do whatever he wants. He can disregard the Intelligence Committee. He can disregard the commands of military. He can disregard all of those people that are around him to help him and assist him in this job of presidency. He doesn't have to listen to them because he can do whatever he wants to do. And that's what we have witnessed over these last 3 years. It has been abuse of power. It has been obstruction of justice. So let's get back to the live broadcast, and I'll be back to share more with you.
The president's efforts were discovered. He released the military aid, though it would ultimately take congressional action for the money to be made fully available to Ukraine. The Oval Office meeting still has not happened. And when faced with the opening of an official impeachment inquiry into his conduct, President Trump launched an unprecedented campaign of obstruction of Congress, ordering executive branch agencies and government officials to defy subpoenas for documents and testimony. To date, the investigating committees have received no documents from the Trump administration pursuant to our subpoenas. Were it not for courageous public servants doing their duty and honoring their oath to this country and coming forward and testifying, the president's scheme might still be concealed today. The central moment in this scheme was a telephone call between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on July 25th of this year. During that call, President Trump asked President Zelensky for a personal favor: to initiate the two investigations that President Trump hoped could ultimately help his re-election in 2020. The first investigation involved former Vice President Joe Biden and was an effort to smear his reputation as he seeks the Democratic nomination in next year's presidential election. The second investigation sought to elevate an entirely debunked conspiracy theory promoted by Russian President Vladimir Putin that Ukraine interfered in the last presidential election to support the Democratic nominee. In truth, as has been made clear by irrefutable evidence from throughout the government, Russia interfered in the last election in order to help then-candidate Trump. The allegations about Vice President Biden and the 2016 election are patently false. But that did not deter President Trump during his phone call with the Ukrainian president, and it does not appear to deter him today. Just 2 days ago, President Trump stated publicly that he hopes that his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, will report to the Department of Justice and to Congress the results of Mr. Giuliani's efforts in Ukraine last week to pursue these false allegations meant to tarnish Vice President Biden. President Trump's persistent and continuing effort to coerce a foreign country to help him cheat to win an election is a clear and present danger to our free and fair elections and to our national security. The overwhelming evidence of this scheme is described in detail in a nearly 300-page document entitled The Trump-Ukraine Impeachment Inquiry Report, formerly transmitted from the House Permanent Selecting Committee on Intelligence to this committee a few days ago. The report relies on testimony from numerous current and former government officials, the vast majority of whom are nonpartisan career professionals responsible for keeping our nation safe and promoting American values around the globe. The evidence from these witnesses cannot seriously be disputed. The President placed his personal interests above the nation's interests in order to help his own re-election efforts. Before I highlight the evidence and the findings of this report, I want to take just a moment to introduce myself and discuss today's testimony. I joined the House Intelligence Committee as Senior Advisor and Director of Investigations at the beginning of this year. Previously, I served for 10 years as a prosecutor in the Southern District of New York when I joined the Department of Justice under the George W. Bush administration. The team that I led on the intelligence community includes other former federal prosecutors, a retired FBI agent, and investigators with significant national security expertise. The report that I am presenting today is based entirely on the evidence that we collected in coordination with the Oversight and Foreign Affairs Committees that were gathered as part of the impeachment inquiry into President Trump's actions. Nothing more and nothing less. The three investigating committees ran a fair, professional, and thorough investigation. We followed the House rules for depositions and public hearings, including the rule against agency counsel being present for depositions, and members and staff from both parties had equal time to ask questions, and there were no substantive questions that were prevented from being asked and answered. This investigation moved swiftly and intensively, as all good investigations should. To the extent that other witnesses would be able to provide more context and detail about this scheme, their failure to testify is due solely to the fact that President Trump obstructed the inquiry and refused to make them available. Nevertheless, the extensive evidence that the committees uncovered during this investigation led to the following critical findings. First, President Trump used the power of his office to pressure and induce the newly elected president of Ukraine to interfere in the 2020 presidential election for President Trump's personal and political benefit. Second, in order to increase the pressure on Ukraine to announce the politically motivated investigations that President Trump wanted, President Trump withheld a coveted Oval Office meeting and $391 of essential military assistance from Ukraine. Third, President Trump's conduct sought to undermine our free and fair elections and poses an imminent threat to our national security. And fourth, faced with the revelation of his pressure campaign against Ukraine, President Trump directed an unprecedented effort to obstruct Congress's impeachment inquiry into his conduct. And with that context in mind, I would like to turn to the evidence of President Trump's conduct concerning Ukraine. My colleague, Mr. Castor, just said that it revolves around 8 lines in one call record. But that sorely ignores the vast amount of evidence that we collected of a months-long scheme directed by the president. But I do want to start with that July 25th phone call, because that is critical evidence of the president's involvement and intent. It was on that day that he held his second phone call with the new Ukrainian president. The first in April was short and cordial, following the Ukrainian president's election success. But this second call would diverge dramatically from what those listening had expected. Now, just prior to this telephone call, President Trump spoke to Gordon Sondland, the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, who had donated $1 million to the president's inaugural campaign, and who had been directed by the president himself to take on a leading role in Ukraine issues. Ambassador Sondland relayed the president's message to President Zelensky through Ambassador Kurt Volker, who had had lunch that day with President Zelensky's top aide, Andrei Yermak, who appears repeatedly through this scheme as President Zelensky's right-hand man. Ambassador Volker texted Mr. Yermak with President Trump's direction. Good lunch, thanks. Heard from White House. Assuming President Z convinces Trump he will investigate, get to the bottom of what happened in 2016, we will nail down for a visit to Washington. Good luck. See you tomorrow. Kurt. So even before the phone call with President Zelensky took place, President Trump had directed that Ukraine initiate the investigation into 2016, the debunked conspiracy theory that Ukraine had interfered in the election, in order for President Zelensky to get the White House visit that he desperately coveted. Ambassador Sondland was clear in his testimony about this quid pro quo.
Frequently frame these complicated issues in the form of a simple question. Was there a quid pro quo? As I testified previously, with regard to the requested White House call and the White House meeting, the answer is yes.
During this call with the Ukrainian leader, President Trump did not discuss matters of importance to the United States, such as Ukraine's efforts to root out corruption. Instead, President Trump veered quickly into the personal favor that he wanted President Zelensky to do. 2 investigations that would help President Trump's re-election effort. Witnesses who listened to the call described it as unusual, improper, inappropriate, and concerning. 2 of them immediately reported their concerns to White House lawyers. Now let me just take a few minutes walking through that important call step by step, because it is evidence that is central to the president's scheme. Near the beginning of the call, President Zelensky said, "I would also like to thank you for your great support in the area of defense. We are ready to continue to cooperate for the next steps. Specifically, we are almost ready to buy more javelins from the United States for defense purposes." The great support in the area of defense included the nearly $400 million of U.S. military assistance to Ukraine, which one witness testified was nearly 10% of Ukraine's defense budget. And this support comes as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2014, when Russia illegally annexed nearly 7% of Ukraine's territory. Since then, the United States and our allies have provided support for Ukraine, an emerging post-Soviet democracy, to fend off Russia in the East. Yet just a few weeks before this July 25th call, President Trump had inexplicably placed a hold on military assistance to Ukraine without providing any reason to his own cabinet members or national security officials. The evidence the committees collected showed that there was unanimous support for the aid from every relevant agency in the Trump administration. Nevertheless, during the call, President Trump complained that U.S. support for Ukraine was not reciprocal, that somehow Ukraine needed to give more to the United States. What did he mean? Well, it became clear, because immediately after President Zelensky brought up U.S. military support and purchasing Javelin anti-tank weapons, President Trump responded, "I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it." Now, the favor that he referenced there included 2 demands that had nothing to do with official U.S. policy or foreign policy. First, President Trump said, "I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. As you saw yesterday, I guess you have one of your wealthy people, it says. The server, they say Ukraine has it. There are a lot of things that went on, the whole situation. I think you're surrounding yourself with some of the same people." And he went on later, "I would like to have the Attorney General call you or your people, and I would like you to get to the bottom of it. As you saw yesterday, that whole nonsense ended with a very poor performance by a man named Robert Mueller, an incompetent performance. but they say a lot of it started with Ukraine. Whatever you can do, it's very important that you do it if that's possible. Here again, President Trump was referring to the baseless conspiracy theory that the Ukrainian government, not Russia, was behind the hack of the Democratic National Committee in 2016. Not a single witness in our investigation testified that there was any factual support for this allegation. To the contrary, a unanimous assessment of the U.S. intelligence community found that Russia alone interfered in the 2016 U.S. election. And Special Counsel Mueller, who indicted 12 Russians for this conspiracy, testified before Congress that the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion. Dr. Fiona Hill, an expert on Russia and President Putin who served on the National Security Council until July, testified that the president was told by his own former senior advisors, including his Homeland Security advisor and his former National Security advisor, that the alternative theory that Ukraine had interfered in the election was false. And although no one in the U.S. government knew of any factual support for this theory,
you're watching the second hour of the Manning Report. I'm Sabbath Rachel LaFleur, sitting in for the Honorable James David Manning, and we are watching a live broadcast of the House Judiciary Committee impeachment hearing that is taking place today. You are listening to Daniel Goldman, who is laying out the evidence as he is part of the investigative committees. He is laying out all of the evidence that they have retained as a result. And as what he has stated thus far has been, again, sound and strong evidence. And as we have witnessed so far earlier, the defense has not been able to go against this evidence in any way, shape, or form. Let's continue to listen.
in the face of clear evidence, not only from intelligence community experts, but from his own national security team, that Russia, not Ukraine, interfered in the 2016 election for the benefit of Donald Trump, President Trump still pressed the Ukrainian government to announce an investigation into this conspiracy theory. And why? Because it would help his own political standing. President Trump even sought to withhold an Oval Office meeting from the president of Ukraine until he fell in line with President Putin's lies, the leader who had actually invaded Ukraine. The second demand that President Trump made of President Zelensky during the July 25th call was to investigate the frontrunner for the Democratic nomination for president in 2020, former Vice President Joe Biden, and his son, Hunter. President Trump stated, "The other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution. So if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me." Witnesses unanimously testified that there was no factual support for this claim. Rather, they noted that Vice President Biden was acting in support of an international consensus and official U.S. policy to clean up the Prosecutor General's office in Ukraine. Despite these facts, by the time of the July 25th call, Mr. Giuliani had been publicly advocating for these two investigations for months, while also using back channels to press Ukrainian officials to initiate them in support of his client, Donald Trump. Ambassador Sondland understood Mr. Giuliani's role very clearly. He testified, "Mr. Giuliani was expressing the desires of the President of the United States, and we knew these investigations were important to the President." To others, Mr. Giuliani was working at cross purposes with official policy channels toward Ukraine, even as he was working on behalf of President Trump. According to former National Security Advisor, Ambassador John Bolton, Mr. Giuliani was a, quote, hand grenade who's going to blow everybody up, unquote. Near the end of the July 25th call, President Zelensky circled back to the pre-cooked message that Ambassador Volker had relayed to President Zelensky's top aide before the call. President Zelensky said, "I also wanted to thank you for your invitation to visit the United States, specifically Washington, D.C. On the other hand, I also wanted to assure you that we will be very serious about the case and we will work on the investigation. In other words, on one hand is the White House visit, while on the other hand, he agreed to pursue the investigations. This statement shows that President Zelensky fully understood at the time of the July 25th call the quid pro quo between these investigations and the White House meeting that President Trump required and that Ambassador Sondland had testified so clearly about. Numerous witnesses testified about the importance of a White House meeting with the President of the United States, specifically a meeting in the Oval Office, an official act by President Trump. As David Holmes, senior official in the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine, said, "It is important to understand that a White House visit was critical to President Zelensky. President Zelensky needed to show U.S. support at the highest levels in order to demonstrate to Russian President Vladimir Putin that he had U.S. backing, as well as to advance his ambitious anti-corruption reform agenda at home." In other words, the White House visit would help Zelensky's anti-corruption reforms. And that support remains critical as President Zelensky meets today with President Putin to try to resolve the conflict in the East. Now, the day after this phone call, President Trump sought to ensure that President Zelensky got the message. On July 26, U.S. officials met with President Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials in Kyiv. And President Zelensky mentioned that President Trump had brought up some, quote, very sensitive issues, unquote. After that meeting, Ambassador Sondland had a private one-on-one meeting with Andrei Yermak, President Zelensky's top aide, during which Ambassador Sondland said that they probably discussed the issue of investigations. At lunch right after that with Mr. Holmes and two other State Department officers, Ambassador Sondland pulled out his cell phone and called President Trump. Somewhat shocked, Mr. Holmes recounted the conversation that followed. "I heard Ambassador Sondland greet the president and explain he was calling from Kyiv. I heard President Trump then clarify that Ambassador Sondland was in Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland replied, yes, he was in Ukraine, and went on to state that President Zelensky, quote, loves your ass, unquote. I then heard President Trump ask, so he's going to do the investigation? Ambassador Sondland replied that he is going to do it, adding that President Zelensky will do anything you ask him to do. After the call, Ambassador Sondland told Mr. Holmes that President Trump did not give a bleep about Ukraine and only cares about the big stuff that benefits the president himself, like the Biden investigation that Mr. Giuliani was pushing. To repeat, and this is very important, Ambassador Sondland spoke to President Trump before the July 25th call with President Zelensky and relayed to Ukrainian officials President Trump's requirement of political investigations in exchange for a White House meeting. And during that call, President Trump asked for the favor of these two political investigations immediately after the Ukrainian president brought up U.S. military support for Ukraine, which President Trump had recently suspended or put on hold. And at the end of the call, President Zelensky made a point of acknowledging the link between the investigations that President Trump requested and the White House meeting that President Zelensky desperately wanted. And then the following day, Ambassador Sondland confirmed to President Trump on the telephone in person that the Ukrainians would indeed initiate the investigations discussed on the call, which was the only thing about Ukraine that President Trump cared about. Now, it's very important to understand that this investigation revealed that the July 25th call was neither the start nor the end of President Trump's efforts to use the powers of his office for personal political gain. And you have to look at all of the evidence in context as a whole. Prior to the call, the president had removed the former ambassador, Marie Yovanovitch, to clear the way for his 3 handpicked agents to spearhead his corrupt agenda in Ukraine: Secretary Perry, Ambassador Sondland, and Ambassador Volker, all of whom attended President Zelensky's inauguration on May 20th. all political appointees, they proved to be more than willing to engage in what Dr. Hill later described as an improper domestic political errand for the president. On April 21st, President Zelensky won the Ukrainian election with 73% of the vote, and he had two primary platforms: to resolve the war in the East with Russia and to root out corruption. That same day, President Trump called to congratulate him on his win. Even though the White House press release following the call stated that President Trump expressed his shared commitment to, quote, root out corruption, unquote, President Trump, in fact, did not mention corruption at all on this call, just like he did not mention corruption on the July 25th call. Shortly after this call, President Trump asked Vice President Mike Pence to attend President Zelensky's inauguration. But on May 13th, President Trump did an about-face and directed Vice President Pence not to attend. An advisor to Vice President Pence testified that the inauguration had not yet been scheduled, and therefore the reason for the abrupt change of plans was not related to any scheduling issues. So what had happened in the 3 weeks between April 21st and May 13th, when Vice President Pence was originally invited and then disinvited or removed from the delegation? A few things. First, on April 25th, Vice President Biden formally announced his bid for the Democratic nomination for president. Then, about a week later, on May 3rd, President Trump spoke with President Putin on the telephone. One senior State Department official testified that the conversation between President Trump and President Putin included a discussion of Ukraine. Third, on May 9th, Mr. Giuliani told the New York Times that he intended to travel to Ukraine on behalf of his client, President Trump, in order to, quote, meddle in an investigation, unquote. But after public backlash and apparent pushback from the Ukrainians, Mr. Giuliani canceled his trip the next day, claiming that President Zelensky was surrounded by enemies of President Trump. At a critical May 23rd meeting in the Oval Office, President Trump said that Ukraine was corrupt and tried to take him down in 2016, the same false narrative pushed by President Putin and Mr. Giuliani. And in order for the White House meeting to occur, President Trump told the delegation they must talk to Rudy to get the visit scheduled. These comments from President Trump were the first of many subsequent indications that in his mind, corruption equals investigations. In the weeks and months following, Mr. Giuliani relayed to both Ukrainian officials and the government officials that President Trump had designated at the May 23rd meeting to take a lead on Ukraine policy, the directive from President Trump that a White House meeting would not occur until Ukraine announced the two political investigations that President Trump required. And well before the July 25th call, Ambassadors Sondland and Volker also relayed this quid pro quo to the Ukrainians, including to President Zelensky himself. Ambassador Volker conveyed the message directly to President Zelensky at the beginning of July, urging him to reference investigations associated with the Giuliani factor with President Trump. And in meetings at the White House on July 10th, Ambassador Sondland told other U.S. officials and two of President Zelensky's advisors, including Mr. Yermak, that he had an agreement with Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney that the White House visit would be scheduled if Ukraine announced the investigations. One witness testified that during the second of the meetings, Ambassador Sondland began to review what the deliverable would be in order to get the meeting, referring to an investigation of the Bidens. The witness told the committee that the request was explicit. There was no ambiguity. And then Ambassador Sondland also mentioned Burisma, a major Ukrainian energy company that Hunter Biden sat on the board of. To the witnesses that testified before the committee, the references to Burisma was shorthand for an investigation into the Bidens. Ambassador Bolton, as well as his staff members, objected to this meeting for investigations trade. And Ambassador Bolton told Dr. Hill, "You go and tell Eisenberg, John Eisenberg, the legal advisor for the National Security Council, that I am not part of whatever drug deal Sondland and Mulvaney are cooking up on this. And you go ahead and tell him what you've heard and what I've said." Yet this was not a rogue operation by Mr. Giuliani and Ambassador Sondland and Volker. As Ambassador Sondland testified, everyone was in the loop, including Mr. Mulvaney, Secretary Pompeo, Secretary Perry, and their top advisors. On July 19th, Ambassador Sondland emailed Mr. Mulvaney, Secretary Perry, Secretary Pompeo, and others after speaking with President Zelensky. The subject was, "I talked to Zelensky just now." And Ambassador Sondland wrote, "He is prepared to receive POTUS's call." POTUS is the President of the United States. "Will assure him that he intends to run a fully transparent investigation and will, quote, turn over every stone," unquote. Both Secretary Perry and Chief of Staff Mulvaney quickly responded to the email, noting that given that conversation, a date would soon be set to schedule the White House telephone call. The evidence also unambiguously shows that the Ukrainians understood this quid pro quo and had serious reservations, particularly because President Zelensky had won the election on an anti-corruption platform. In fact, a few days before the July 25th call, Ambassador William Taylor, the acting U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and the former permanent ambassador to Ukraine, texted Ambassador Sondland and Volker. Or rather, he stated in his testimony, "On July 20th, I had a phone conversation with Mr. Danylyuk, during which he conveyed to me that President Zelensky did not want to be used as a pawn in a U.S. re-election campaign." But President Trump's pressure campaign on President Zelensky did not relent. And just 4 days later, President Zelensky received that message via Kurt Volker that he needed to convince President Trump that he would do the investigations in order to get that White House meeting. And as I have described, President Zelensky tried to do exactly that on the July 25th call with President Trump. In the weeks following the July 25th call, President Zelensky heeded President Trump's request, sending his top aide, Mr. Yermak, to Madrid to meet with Mr. Giuliani. In coordination with Mr. Giuliani, President Trump's handpicked representatives, they continued this pressure campaign to secure a public announcement of the investigations. Now, according to Ambassador Sondland, and this is very important, President Trump did not require that Ukraine actually conduct the investigations as a prerequisite for the White House meeting. Instead, the Ukrainian government needed only to publicly announce the investigations. It is clear that the goal was not the investigations themselves or not any corruption that those investigations might have entailed, but the political benefit that President Trump would enjoy from an announcement of investigations into his 2020 political rival and against a unanimous assessment that showed that he received foreign support in the 2016 election. And for that reason, the facts didn't actually matter to President Trump because he only cared about the personal and political benefit from the announcement of the investigation. Over the next couple of weeks, Ambassador Sondland and Volker worked with President Trump's aide, Mr. Yermak, to draft a statement for President Zelensky to issue. When the aide proposed a statement that did not include specific references to the investigations that President Trump wanted, the Burisma and Biden investigation and the 2016 election investigation, Mr. Giuliani relayed that that would not be good enough to get a White House meeting. And here you can see a comparison on the left of the original statement drafted by Mr. Yermak, the top aide to President Zelensky, and on the right, a revised statement with Mr. Giuliani's requirements. And it says, "We intend to initiate and complete a transparent and unbiased investigation of all available facts and episodes." And here's the critical difference, including those involving Burisma and the 2016 U.S. elections, which in turn will prevent the recurrence of this problem in the future. The only difference in the statement that Giuliani required and the statement that the Ukrainians had drafted was this reference to the two investigations that President Trump wanted and told President Zelensky about on the July 25th call. Now, ultimately, President Zelensky's administration temporarily shelved this announcement, though efforts to press Ukraine would remain ongoing. By mid-August, Ukraine did not make a public announcement of the investigations that President Trump required, and as a result, no White House meeting was scheduled. But by this time, the president was pushing on another pressure point to coerce Ukraine to announce the investigations: the hold on the vital military assistance that the president had put in place for more than a month, still without any explanation to any of the policy experts. Our investigation revealed that a number of Ukrainian officials had made quiet inquiries to various U.S. officials about the aid as early as July 25th, the day of the phone call. Inquiries by Ukrainian officials continued in the weeks that followed until the hold was revealed at the end of August. But this is important. It was important for the Ukrainian officials to keep it quiet, because if it became public, then Russia would know that the U.S. support for Ukraine might be on ice. So by the end of that month, the evidence revealed several facts. One, the president demanded that Ukraine publicly announce 2 politically motivated investigations to benefit his re-election. 2, a coveted White House meeting was expressly conditioned on Ukraine announcing those investigations. 3, President Trump had placed a hold on vital military assistance to Ukraine without any explanation, and notwithstanding the uniform support for that assistance from the relevant federal agencies and Congress. Ambassador Taylor testified that this quid pro quo between the investigations President Trump wanted and the security assistance that President Trump needed was crazy. And he told Ambassador Sondland, "As I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign." Now, in an effort to move the White House meeting and the military aid along, Ambassador Sondland wrote an email to Secretary Pompeo on August 22nd. He wrote, "Mike, should we block time in Warsaw for a short pull-aside for POTUS to meet Zelensky? I would ask Zelensky to look him in the eye and tell him that once Ukraine's new justice folks are in place, parentheses, mid-September, President Zelensky, should be able to move forward publicly and with confidence on those issues of importance to POTUS and to the U.S. Hopefully, that will break the logjam." Ambassador Sondland testified that this was a reference to the political investigations that President Trump discussed on the July 25th call, which Secretary Pompeo ultimately admitted to that he listened to in real time. Ambassador Sondland hoped that this would help lift the logjam, which he meant the hold on critical security assistance to Ukraine and the White House meeting. And what was Secretary Pompeo's response 3 minutes later? Yes. After the hold on military assistance became public on August 28th, senior Ukrainian officials expressed grave concern. Deeply worried, of course, about the practical impact on their efforts to fight Russian aggression, but also, and this goes back to why it remained confidential, also about the public message that it sent to the Russian government. On September 1st, at a pre-briefing with Vice President Pence before he met with President Zelensky, Ambassador Sondland raised the issue of the hold on security assistance. He said, "I mentioned to Vice President Pence before the meetings with the Ukrainians that I had concerns that the delay in aid had become tied to the issue of investigations." Vice President Pence simply nodded in response, expressing neither surprise nor dismay at the linkage between the two. And following Vice President Pence's meeting with President Zelensky, Ambassador Sondland went over to Mr. Yermak again, President Zelensky's top aide, and pulled him aside to explain that the hold on security assistance was also now conditioned on the public announcement of the Burisma Biden and the 2016 election interference investigations. Ambassador Sondland then explained to Ambassador Taylor that he had previously made a mistake in telling Ukrainian officials that only the White House meeting was conditioned on a public announcement of the political investigations beneficial to President Trump. In truth, everything, the White House meeting and the vital security assistance to Ukraine, was now conditioned on the public announcement. President Trump wanted President Zelensky in a public box. A private commitment was not good enough. Nearly 1 week later, on September 7th, the hold remained, and President Trump and Ambassador Sondland spoke on the phone. The president immediately told Ambassador Sondland that there was no quid pro quo, but, and this is very important, President Zelensky would still be required to announce the investigations in order for the hold on security assistance to be lifted, and he should want to do it. In effect, this is the equivalent of saying there is no quid pro quo, know this for that, before then demanding precisely that quid pro quo. And immediately after this phone call with President Trump, this was the precise message that Ambassador Sondland passed directly to President Zelensky. According to Ambassador Taylor, Ambassador Sondland also said that he had talked to President Zelensky and Mr. Yermak and had told them that although this was not a quid pro quo, if President Zelensky did not clear things up in public, we would be at a stalemate. And I understood a stalemate to mean that Ukraine would not receive the much-needed military assistance. Needing the military assistance and hoping for the White House meeting, President Zelensky finally relented to President Trump's pressure campaign, and arrangements were soon made for the Ukrainian president to make a statement during an interview on CNN where he would make a public announcement of the two investigations that President Trump wanted, in order for President Zelensky to secure the White House meeting and for Ukraine to get that much-needed military assistance. And although there is no doubt that President Trump had ordered the military aid held up until the Ukrainians committed to the investigations, on October 17th, Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney confirmed in public that there was such a quid pro quo. Let's watch what he said.
Those were the driving factors. Did he also mention to me in the past that the corruption related to the DNC server? Absolutely, no question about that. But that's it, and that's why we held up the money. Now, there was a report.
So the demand for an investigation into the Democrats was part of the reason that he ordered to withhold funding to Ukraine.
The look back to what happened in 2016 certainly was part of the thing that he was worried about in corruption with that nation. And that is absolutely appropriate.
There you have it. By early September, the president's scheme was unraveling. On September 9th, the Intelligence Oversight and Foreign Affairs Committees announced an investigation into President Trump and Mr. Giuliani's efforts in Ukraine. And later that same day, the Intelligence Committee learned that a whistleblower had filed a complaint nearly a month earlier related to some unknown issue, but which the President and the White House knew was related to Ukraine and had been circulating among them for some time. And then 2 days later, on September 11th, in the face of growing public and congressional scrutiny, President Trump lifted the hold on security assistance to Ukraine. As with the implementation of the hold, no reason was provided. Put simply, President Trump got caught, so he released the aid. But even since this investigation began, the president has demonstrated no contrition or acknowledgement that his demand for a foreign country to interfere in our election is wrong. In fact, he has repeatedly called on Ukraine to investigate Vice President Biden, his rival. These and other actions by the president and his associates demonstrate that his determination to solicit foreign interference in our election continues today. It did not end with Russia's support for Trump in 2016, which President Trump invited by asking for his opponent to be hacked by Russia, and it did not end when his Ukrainian scheme was exposed in September of this year. President Trump also engaged, once this investigation began, in an unprecedented effort to obstruct the inquiry. And I look forward to answering your questions about that unprecedented obstruction. But in conclusion, I want to say that the Intelligence Committee has produced to you a nearly 300-page report. And I am grateful that you have offered me the opportunity today to walk you through some of the evidence underlying it. Admittedly, it is a lot to digest. But let me just say this. The president's scheme is actually quite simple, and the facts are not seriously in dispute. It can be boiled down to 4 key takeaways. First, that President Trump directed a scheme to pressure Ukraine into opening 2 investigations that would benefit his 2020 re-election campaign and not the U.S. national interest. Second, President Trump used his official office and the official tools of U.S. foreign policy, the withholding of an Oval Office meeting and $391 million in security assistance to pressure Ukraine into meeting his demands. Third, everyone was in the loop, his chief of staff, the Secretary of State, and Vice President. And fourth, despite the public discovery of this scheme, which prompted the president to release the aid, he has not given up. He and his agents continue to solicit Ukrainian interference in our election, causing an imminent threat to our elections and our national security. Members of the committee, President Trump's
Regular order, Mr. Chairman. Time has elapsed. Point of order.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Deitch.
Okay, we
Chairman, I have a
are listening to Daniel Goldman, who just spoke and laid out the evidence against Tribulation Trump and his abuse of power and obstruction of justice. And as I was listening to him and taking notes, he made so many overwhelming statements. And I think those are the two words that I wrote down. Because they kept saying that they had overwhelming evidence, and indeed they do. As he went from start to finish, starting from April of this year to what happened most recently, and laid down the evidence as to what took place, it was quite unprecedented that these are the facts. These are not opinions that he made. These are not hearsays. These are the facts that actually truly happened. And he laid them down with such precision. He had text messages. He had emails. He had phone call statements that was made. He had the statements that was put on record. I mean, this is quite unbelievable as they laid all of this evidence out before the public. And so when we listen to the defense, and certainly as we listened earlier to the defense, and I say again that it was certainly a poor defense of Tribulation Trump, there is no way that you can refute what we just heard. How do you refute the text messages that were sent back and forth between persons? How do you refute the emails that were sent? How do you refute the testimonies and the telephone calls and all of the statements that have been made by various people? And so, as we saw earlier, the defense is going to continue to try to make excuses and try to make the statement. And their number one claim or their number one defense of Tribulation Trump is that the Democrats have been always trying to impeach Tribulation Trump since he became the president of the United States, howbeit all in an illegal manner. That is their number one defense that they are pushing. They are pushing this narrative that is just because they hate him so much. It's just because they don't agree with his policies. That's why they're trying to impeach him. It has nothing to do with the facts or the evidence that has been laid forth. And the narrative that Adam Schiff is not here and he made up this story, these are all accusations that he made up himself. Well, Giuliani, where's Rudy Giuliani? Is he here? Did anyone see him there? You know, ironically enough, Bill Barr counseled Tribulation Trump and basically told Trump, you know, you need to get rid of Giuliani. He's become a liability to you. As we know that Giuliani went forth in support of Tribulation Trump, and he went to Ukraine instructed by Tribulation Trump. Now Bill the Barr gangster is telling Tribulation Trump, you need to get rid of this guy. He's a liability to you. He's not serving you well. And this has been reported. And so what we have seen thus far in this hearing, you've seen all of the evidence laid out. How can you refute the evidence? How do you deny the emails? How do you deny the text messages? How do you make excuses about what was said in those emails and text messages? How do you deny the fact that Tribulation Trump said, I want you to do us a favor though? And then turn that around and say, no, he didn't say I want you to do us a favor. He said, I need you to assist us. Lies on top of lies. That is the only way they can try to defend Tribulation Trump, is by spewing more lies. It is very difficult to refute the truth, but I understand that they have to try. I understand that they're going to try. And as we continue to watch all of this unfold and watch all of the questionings that's going to go back and forth and watch how they try to refute all of these things have been stated. And let me read Pastor Manning's statement again. He made the statement earlier to those of you who are just chiming in. And this was in regards to Stephen Castro, who spoke earlier in defense of Tribulation Trump. And Pastor Manning states, Attorney Castro has not offered one defense statement against the actual charges, not even a denial the Tribulation Trump pressured President Zelensky. Incredible. Not one defense in any kind of strength have been laid forth. And though they're about to go on again and make their defense in favor of Tribulation Trump, nothing is going to hold up. Sometime this week or by next week, we should be hearing as they vote on impeachment of Tribulation Trump. And more than half of the country is in agreement that Tribulation Trump needs to be impeached. Now, again, as I stated earlier, we understand that his base is going to continue to stay with him no matter what. No matter what evidence is put forth, no matter what is said. But it's very interesting as we have observed all that has been laid out before us, all of this evidence that we did not know about prior to this hearing today. We've heard many statements from Sondland. We've heard many statements from other witnesses, but surely there is new evidence that's been brought forth through text messages and emails that we are viewing with our own eyes of the evidence of Tribulation Trump, of his abuse of power, of his obstruction of justice. You know, the defense can try to push the narrative, oh, well, you know, first they tried to say that Russia colluded and they didn't get anywhere with that. And then they tried to pull out the Mueller investigation and they didn't get anywhere with that. Now they're trying to push this Ukraine scandal. That is the only narrative that they can push, but they cannot speak any truth whatsoever. No truth. Now, whether you are for Tribulation Trump or whatever the case is, you can't deny the truth. You may not like it, you may not want to hear it, but you cannot deny the evidence that have just been laid before us. So as we continue to watch this unfold before our eyes, and as a result of today's hearing, the vote is coming up. What kind of Christmas is going to take place this year? You know, speaking of what kind of Christmas, I do want to mention the fact that Kim Jong-un made a statement a few days ago in stating, well, you know, the United States can decide on what kind of Christmas they're going to have there. And this past weekend, they tested another missile. And so when you listen to Tribulation Trump and say, uh-oh, you know, I think that, you know, this special relationship that we have, I think, you know, he's messing that up. Here they are testing missiles. They're making the statements saying, what kind of Christmas are you going to have? And here is this man who is a complete idiot stating that our special relationship, that we have a special relationship. I mean, my God. So when you look at all of these leaders in other countries and foreign countries laughing at Tribulation Trump behind his back and talking behind his back at NATO, and you watch Tribulation Trump getting upset and getting a tantrum and, mommy, please come pick me up from NATO. I want to go home. They don't want to be my friends anymore. And you watch Kim Jong-un make statements against Tribulation Trump, and you watch his own country, so-called, his people, go against him. My God, my God, my God, my God. This is absolutely incredible. We have never seen anything like this. We are in a new place. And God knows we saw a lot with Barack Obama, the long-legged Mac Daddy. But this is all new. All of this lawlessness is quite unprecedented. And so as we continue to watch what unfolds and what takes place, I am quite, you know, when I asked the question, what kind of Christmas is America going to have this year? I know what kind of Christmas we're going to have here. And I don't say that in a haughty way at all. I don't say that with haughtiness. But what kind of Christmas is America going to have? Between Kim Jong-un, between this impeachment, between the other foreign leaders, and again, Zelensky and Putin are scheduled to meet today. They're scheduled to meet today. What kind of Christmas is America going to have in 2019? I will say it, and I've said it many times before. We are living in days that we have never lived in before. We are seeing things that we have never seen before, hearing things that we have never heard before. And it's all because we are in the midst of the tribulation. Now, I understand clearly how many times, people want to run away from that statement or run away from that thought. They don't dare want to think about we are in the midst of the tribulation, but it's actually so. And as we are continuing to witness all of these things take place, we really haven't seen anything yet. So let's continue to watch in the remaining minutes of the second hour of the Manning Report. And let's see what unfolds. But I want to remind everyone again, before we go back to the live broadcast, that we are having our Christmas extravaganza here, a great Christmas show, and the children are rehearsing. And my God, if you are in the 5 boroughs of New York City, you certainly want to come out and watch the children and watch the gospel singing. It's going to be something that you have never seen before. We have some extremely talented children in this house. God has truly blessed this house with tremendous talent. And so you certainly don't want to miss the Christmas shows. And we have all of the dates that goes up before you. And so you want to make sure that you are in tune with what is going on. This past Sabbath, we had a rehearsal. And my God, just to watch all of the children dance and to hear them sing, it was quite incredible. And that was just a taste of what they were going to do. And so on those days, and we have them listed here on the 21st, the 22nd, the 23rd, the 24th of December. If you're in New York City, you don't want to miss. I have been here many years, and I have seen many Christmas concerts that we have had here. But this year, with so many new students that have come to our school, with so many fresh talent, so many new singers that have come forth, it's just a blessing. It's a blessing to be a part of all of this. It's a blessing to watch all of this talent unfold. And praise Almighty God. I'm just thankful to God Almighty that He has allowed me to be a part of the move of this house. And we certainly want to thank our leader, the Honorable James David Manning, as he is the leader of this house, the servant of the Lord. He instructs us and guides us and leads us and prays for us on a daily basis. I also want to remind everyone to continue to give to our ministries. You want to make sure that you download the Cash app to your phones, whether or not you have an Android or an iPhone. Everyone can do it. Just download it. Put in your bank information from your card. Put in the amount that you want to send. It's really easy to use, and your donations will be sent directly to us. Make sure that you type in $ATLAH, ATLAH, all caps, and it will be sent directly to us. But if you want to use the snail mail, and that's fine too, make sure that you send your gifts and your donations to P.O. Box 2423, and that is ATLAH, All the Land Anointed Holy, New York 10027. I want to encourage you all as well to continue to support our schools, the Great Tomorrow's Elementary and Middle School, and the ATLAH High Schools, as well as the Gourmet Breakfast Program, which is certainly a blessing every day. All right, I think we need to take a break here, and then we'll be back with more of the Manning Report.
It'll make a junkie say Jesus is Lord. I got a word in my mouth. I got a word.
Please come to ATLAH for the Christmas celebration. At the end of this little talk I have here now, there'll be the dates of the full full-blown Christmas extravaganza, gospel, soulful, classical extravaganza concert. So I can't actually show you what the Christmas songs will be because they're copyrighted. But what I want to do is to show you something of the talents of the people that we have within the congregation. And one of our young superstars is a young man by the name of David Solomon. And we're going to actually have him perform the song Music of the Night from the Phantom of the Opera, along with the entire choir of our Atla school system. Please come to Atla for the Christmas celebration.
Every year, more than 15,000 people aren't there anymore because they accidentally or knowingly misuse an opioid pain medication. Gone because someone was careless. If you've been prescribed opioids, please don't take chances. Follow your dosage plan exactly. Keep track of your meds, store them securely, dispose of them properly, and never, ever share. Drugs can help control your pain, but it's up to you to control your drugs. Because isn't there enough pain already?
At Great Tomorrow's Elementary, Middle Schools, and Atla High School, we provide students with a great education, safe environment, and biblical principles that will help build your child's character. We stress the total development of each child: spiritual, moral, intellectual, social, emotional, and physical. Our motto, all excellence all the time, is part of our wonderful math curriculum: memory, articulation, and discipline, given to the Honorable James David Manning by Almighty God. If you're looking for a nurturing Christian environment for your children, look no further and discover why Great Tomorrow's Elementary, Middle Schools, and Atla High School are without a doubt
the best school in America.
One in 285 children in the U.S. will be diagnosed with cancer by the time they are 20 years old.
Childhood cancer is the leading cause of death by disease in children under the age of 19 in the U.S.
Just over 50% of children die with cancer before the age of 20 survived at least 5 years.
St. Jude is the #1 hospital for pediatric cancer. It costs $2.4 million a day to run, and there's no cost to be treated.
Cancer research only receives just 4% of the annual budget from the National Cancer Institute. You can help childhood cancer research by donating money today.
As we're in the midst of the Christmas season, I wanted to talk about a couple of reports that I viewed last night, and that is 3 students at a New Jersey university committed suicide this semester. And as I read that article, I thought about a couple of things, because another article came up that a 12-year-old girl was arrested because she made a death list. She made a list of students that she wanted to kill in her middle school, and this was in Florida. And so I thought about these 3 students in this university who committed suicide this semester, and I thought about this 12-year-old girl in Florida who made a death list. And I remembered something that one of my classmates said to me as she works in a mental institution. And one of the things she said to me was that she had never seen so many young people come in with the spirit of depression. And, this is a woman who is in her 60s, and she stated that she sees a lot of young people who come in and out of the hospital in which she works in, and she speaks to them all the time. These are students who are in college. These are young teenagers who come in with the spirit of depression and who want to either hurt themselves or hurt someone else. And so as I viewed these two reports last night, and I thought, my God, these are young people. And I thought about the young people of this house and how the hand of God is upon them, and how it's so very important as we look at the spirit of depression and we look at the spirit that is out in the world today. Again, we are viewing things that we have never viewed before. And I thought about myself growing up as a young girl. And as a young girl, having parents who are immigrants, having parents who were born in Nigeria, and growing up, being born here in America and growing up in America with my siblings, we were teased a lot because our parents were African, because we had an African last name. We were teased a lot. We were teased about our skin color. We were teased about being from Africa. We were teased about our name and made fun of. But when I thought about myself as a young girl, even though I was teased, and it was extremely painful to be teased as a young girl, I never had the thought to take my own life. I never had the thought to want to kill someone else, even growing up being teased. And our program producer, Major Rainbow Farr, who is my younger sister, we all went through this. And I'm sure that many of you out there have gone through this as young people growing up, because young people can be very mean towards one another. But I never had the thought to want to kill someone. And you hear people make the statements and say, well, I'm going to kill her, I'm going to kill him. But they don't actually mean to take the life of someone. And so in these days, we are witnessing young people who are walking into schools, shooting up children all over the place. We are witnessing children making death lists and putting them on social media. Now, there are pros to social media and there are cons against social media. And the way that young people are using social media to do all of these wicked things is unprecedented. Now they have a platform. Social media has become a platform for young people to do all kinds of wickedness. And as this young girl who was arrested at 12 years old and sent to a juvenile detention, though she admitted that those were false threats that she was making, but the idea to actually list people's name down as a kill list is quite unbelievable. And to those parents of those 3 university students who are now burying their children as a result of them taking their own lives, we are in the midst of the Christmas season. We need to pray. We really need to pray for people. Now, I hear people all the time make comments, oh, Christmas is a pagan holiday and Jesus wasn't really born in December. How do you know when Jesus was born? I mean, it's quite remarkable when I listen to the comments that people make. You're angry at me, or you want to yell at me because I want to celebrate the birth of Jesus. Does it really matter? Can we not just celebrate the birth of Jesus? Because he was born. Now, whether or not you want to believe he was born in December or not, but he certainly was born. Can I celebrate the birth of my Savior? Because that's really the bottom line. And so as we celebrate the birth of Jesus, we certainly want to pray. There are so many people that are going through so much pain, so many people who are losing their loved ones, burying their children, and a parent should not have to bury his child. It is extremely painful. And so again, as I viewed all of these reports last night, and I look at what is going on with our young children in this world today, and I can't help but thank God for this house. I can't help but thank God for this school. I can't help but thank God that the Honorable James David Manning is in charge of leading these young children and having teachers around who he has instructed, who he has instilled in, to teach the young people, to instill character in them, to teach them to never give up, to teach them to give to someone else, because there's so many people that are hurting. We are giving $100,000 to Ethiopia. As you know, the woman who is the CNN hero, who was actually one of the contestants, or one of the people who was to be looked at to be in CNN hero, she actually won last night. The 2019 CNN hero is this wonderful, beautiful woman who is making sanitary napkins, reusable sanitary napkins for young girls in Ethiopia so that they can go to school. She won last night, the 2019 CNN hero. And Pastor Manning made that statement weeks before we know who was going to win. But she touched his heart. And he made a statement and said, we were going to give $100,000 to assist in the aid of these young girls in Ethiopia. And CNN as well contributed some monies to her as well. So certainly this was without a doubt the right choice. Pastor Manning made those statements a couple of weeks ago. And so as we look at all of this and him teaching the young people of how to give, how to not think about yourself, but to give to someone else, there are so many people that are hurting in the world today. We need to pray for people. We need to encourage people. Now, I'm not certainly encouraging people to do wrong. I would never do that. I would never pray for people to do wrong. Certainly not. But there's so many people that are hurting. These parents of these young people who took their lives this semester, they won't have their children this Christmas. They are not able to celebrate Christmas with their children anymore, because for whatever reasons, their children took their lives. The spirit of depression, this spirit of mental health, this spirit that is in the earth today, especially amongst our young people, is growing rampant, where you can walk in schools and shoot everyone, where you can make a kill list, even if you're not intentionally not planning to do it, but the thought of entertaining that thought to make a kill list at 12 years old. We are witnessing days that we have never seen before. And more is going to take place. I hate to say it, but a lot more tragedies are going to take place. And so I want to pray for all of those who are hurting this Christmas season. I want to pray for those who lost their children to opioid addiction, to suicide, to all kinds of things that have taken place in the lives of these young people. I want to pray for them today and pray God's strength in the young people, and pray that God would be with the parents and the guardians of these young people, because it's a very difficult thing to have to bury your child. Most parents want their child to outlive them. You certainly don't expect to be burying your own child. And so as we celebrate the birth of our Savior, Jesus Christ, we need to keep in mind to pray for one another, and to keep in mind to give, as Pastor Manning has spoken to us, to give to somebody else. If you haven't gotten your red mug already, you certainly want to do so and give to someone else. As Pastor has instructed, put a couple of dollars in there and give it to someone. There is someone in need. No matter what we are going through as individuals, there's always someone out there that's going through something that is far worse than what we could ever imagine. And so I'm thankful to God Almighty again for this house. I'm thankful for Pastor Manning and Mother Manning. I'm thankful for the Word of God that carries us through. And as God has called us to walk into the supernatural, we have an obligation and a duty as Christians to reach out and pull our brother up. If our brother is in the ditch, it is our duty. If God has blessed us and God has shown us and God has opened up our eyes, it is our duty to go and help someone else. because once upon a time, we were once there too. I can't even imagine where my life would be if it was not for this house. And so I say this in all humility to pull someone else up as we celebrate the birth of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, to pray for someone else who is going through, who is in need. That is our duty as Christians. And so I pray that you will continue to listen to the Trust in the Lord Hour. I pray that you will continue to listen to the Manning Report and the Pulpit of Hour and all of the platforms in which the Honorable James David Manning speaks, as it is critically important that we continue to hear what thus says the Lord. And as he has spoken just this past Sabbath, healing is on the way. Hold on. Don't give up. Let your faith carry you through. God has not given up on you, and neither has the Honorable James David Manning. I'm Sabbath Rachel Leffler. Peace out.
It'll make a junkie say Jesus is Lord. I got a word in my mouth. I got a word.